The 5 times to strive. One day, without warning, we look up from our life and feel a quiet fear. What if the time to truly wake up was never later but now? Before life quietly slips beyond our grasp, there are moments of rare blessing when the path of practice opens wide before us. This narration follows an intimate, reflective journey through a teaching from the Anguttara Nikaya, speaking to anyone who has ever delayed what they knew mattered most, and asking a simple, piercing question. When conditions are favorable, will we awaken in time to use them? We live as though tomorrow is patient, as though strength will remain, as though the mind can be purified at some more convenient hour. Yet beneath the routines, the plans, the duties, and the distractions, there is a softer truth many of us can feel but rarely face. Life is moving, even now, and it does not wait for us to be ready. If you find this useful, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment. There is something deeply human about postponement. We postpone rest, we postpone honesty, we postpone healing, and perhaps most of all, we postpone the work of the heart. We tell ourselves that once the children are older, once the career is stable, once the house is paid for, once the pressure eases, once this difficult season passes, then we will sit quietly, then we will look inward, then we will practice, then we will return to what we already know is essential. But life has a strange way of replacing one burden with another. One worry finishes, and the next one enters. One obligation fades, and another takes its place. Years pass not always in dramatic tragedy, but in small delays that seem harmless until suddenly they are not. Many people do not ignore the spiritual path because they are careless or shallow. Often, they ignore it because they are tired. They are carrying parents, children, debts, disappointments, private griefs, illnesses no one sees, fears they do not name. They wake before sunrise to work. They answer messages while eating. They lie awake long after midnight with a mind that does not know how to rest. They try to be good, useful, dependable. They survive by moving from task to task. And in the middle of all that, something tender within them waits. It waits through ambition. It waits through resentment. It waits through entertainment, through exhaustion, through years of saying, not now, not yet, maybe later. This is the sorrow of ordinary life. Not only that we suffer, but that we become so accustomed to suffering that we stop noticing how deeply it shapes us. Irritation becomes personality, becomes normal. Desire becomes motivation. Restlessness becomes identity. We do not always see the dust gathering on the mind because everyone around us is breathing the same air. And so the inner work seems optional, even luxurious, something for another season, another kind of person, another stage of life. Yet the Buddha's teaching does not speak to some distant ideal person. It speaks directly to people like us, people living in conditions that rise and fall, people vulnerable to aging, sickness, loss, confusion, and regret. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha points to 5 precious periods in life when one should be diligent in practice. 5 times when conditions are favorable and should not be wasted, because those conditions do not remain forever. The teaching is simple, but it carries the force of compassion and realism. It does not flatter us. It does not indulge the fantasy that there will always be a better time. It reminds us that favorable conditions are fragile, and wisdom means recognizing them before they disappear. This urgency is not meant to frighten us in a crude or hopeless way. It is not the urgency of panic. It is the urgency of clarity. There is a great difference between being rushed by fear and being awakened by truth. When the Buddha speaks of striving, he is not calling us into violence against ourselves. He is not asking us to practice with tightness, self-hatred, or spiritual ambition. This striving is not grim force. It is not a feverish need to become special. It is not the ego trying to conquer enlightenment as one more accomplishment. Rather, this striving is steady, sincere effort. It is the willingness to turn toward the mind and know it honestly. It is the courage to see greed as greed, anger as anger, delusion as delusion, and not decorate them with excuses. It is the gentle but unwavering work of purification, of reducing defilements, of loosening the habits that keep us bound to dissatisfaction. It is the discipline of remembering what truly matters when the world keeps trying to convince us that only urgency of another kind deserves our attention. To strive in this way is to care for liberation as something real. It is to understand that peace is not found by accident, and freedom does not appear simply because we admire it from a distance. The mind must be trained, the heart must be softened, conduct must be purified, attention must be gathered, wisdom must be cultivated again and again, in ordinary moments, in difficult moments, in unnoticed moments. This is why favorable conditions matter so much. When the body has strength, when the world is stable, when the teachings are available, when guidance is present, practice can deepen. And when these conditions deteriorate, what was once possible with relative ease may become painfully difficult. If we are honest, most of us live with an unspoken assumption: I will practice when life calms down. But what if life does not calm down in the way we imagine? What if this very uncertainty is the reason to begin? What if the search for a perfect moment is itself one of the mind's cleverest forms of delay? There are people who intend to meditate after retirement, only to meet illness first. There are people who assume old age will bring wisdom, only to discover that old habits harden more easily than they dissolve. There are people who think they will become kinder once success arrives, calmer once security arrives, freer once duty lessens. Yet without training, the mind often carries its turmoil into every new chapter. The Buddha's compassion can be felt in the directness of this teaching. He knows how quickly human beings drift. He knows how seductive postponement is. He knows how we cling to the mirage of more time. So he does not merely praise practice in abstract terms. He points to actual seasons of opportunity, conditions in which a wise person should recognize a blessing and make use of it. This is not a philosophy for someday. It is guidance for the living present. And maybe that is what makes this teaching so intimate. It does not ask us first what we believe. It asks us what condition we are in. Are we young or aging, healthy or weakened, burdened by survival or given enough support to breathe, living in peace or surrounded by calamity, sustained by true spiritual community or cut off from it? The path is always noble, but our ability to walk it is not untouched by circumstance. Wisdom includes understanding both the timeless truth and the temporary window through which we can approach it. There is a quiet tenderness in admitting this. We do not control everything. We do not command the body to remain well. We do not order society to remain peaceful. We do not guarantee that noble teachings will always be available in pure form, or that wholesome companions will remain near us forever. So when conditions are favorable, gratitude should arise, but gratitude alone is not enough. Gratitude must become use. Blessing must become practice. Opportunity must become effort. How often have we recognized value only after it was gone? Health after illness, silence after noise, friendship after distance, time after loss. In the same way, many people recognize the preciousness of practice only when their powers have declined, when the mind is less clear, when responsibilities have multiplied, when crisis has already arrived. By then, even sincere effort may feel like rowing against a hard current. Still possible, perhaps. Still meaningful, certainly, but harder than it needed to be. This is why the teaching feels almost like a loving warning. Do not wait until the house is on fire to look for water. Do not wait until the body collapses to appreciate energy. Do not wait until confusion thickens to begin training attention. Do not wait until the teachings are distant echoes to seek wise guidance. The path is not closed, but the gate does not always stand this open. And yet there is no accusation here, only invitation. Even if we have delayed for many years, This moment is still a beginning. Even if we have wasted favorable conditions before, seeing that clearly is already part of wisdom. Regret can either harden into self-punishment or soften into resolve. The Buddha's teaching points toward the second, not despair, but diligence. Not shame, but awakening. Not the thought, I have failed, but the realization, I must not keep sleeping through what is precious. Perhaps as you listen, you can feel your own life quietly entering the room. The unfinished conversations, the fatigue in your chest, the habits that keep circling back, the longing for a simpler, cleaner mind, the wish to live with less resentment, less fear, less grasping. The wish not merely to cope, but to understand. Not merely to get through the day, but to free the heart. This teaching is for that longing. It speaks to the part of us that already knows there is no substitute for inner work. There are teachings that comfort us, and there are teachings that wake us. This one does both. It comforts by reminding us that the path is possible, practical, and close to human life. It wakes us by reminding us that the window of ease does not remain open forever. To hear this well is to feel both humbled and encouraged. Humbled, because we are more fragile than we pretend. Encouraged, because we may still have conditions worth using right now. So, as we move into these 5 times for diligent practice, let this not be heard as a sermon of pressure, but as a mirror held gently before the face. Let it reveal where life is still giving us support, where the path is still open, where the heart still has room to turn. Let it remind us that awakening is not nourished by vague admiration, but by actual effort, offered steadily while causes and conditions still allow it. And to understand why the Buddha spoke with such urgency, we begin with the season many people waste most easily: youth. Youth is the season that feels the least urgent and, for that very reason, may be the most dangerous to squander. When the limbs are strong, when sleep restores quickly, when the mind can still recover from strain, when hope rises more easily than fear, a person often lives as though time were an endless field. The body seems obedient, the future seems wide, the consequences of neglect still hide at a distance. And so many pass through their youngest years with the quiet assumption that serious practice can always wait until later. After one more pleasure, one more ambition, one more attachment has been tasted and exhausted. But the Buddha's teaching turns our face toward a truth that youth itself does not like to hear. It says, strive while you are still able. Strive while your strength can still be gathered. Strive while your mind can still be trained with relative ease. Strive before aging bends the body, before sickness interrupts your plans, before death closes every unfinished intention. This is not a rejection of youth. It is a rescue of youth. It is a reminder that the brightest season of life is not given merely for enjoyment, display, or self-invention. It is also given as a rare and powerful opportunity for liberation. There is a special force in youth. Energy rises quickly. Resolve can be fierce. The body can sit longer, walk farther, endure discomfort more steadily. The mind, though often restless, also has elasticity. It can learn deeply, change direction, absorb discipline, and begin again. A young person can commit to restraint, train speech, guard the senses, study the Dhamma, learn to observe the mind, and establish wholesome habits with a vigor that later years may not easily support. In youth, one can still shape life before life hardens around its habits. And that matters more than most people realize. Because what we call character is often repeated choice. What we call destiny is often reinforced inclination. A thought welcomed again and again becomes a tendency. A tendency repeated becomes a habit. A habit protected becomes an identity. And an identity defended over many years becomes a prison that no longer feels like a prison, because we have decorated it, justified it, and called it who I am. This is why early effort is such a blessing. When mindfulness is planted early, it grows roots before the weeds of heedlessness have taken over the whole field. When restraint is practiced early, desire does not become so arrogant. When compassion is cultivated early, the heart does not become as dry, suspicious, or self-centered. When wisdom is listened to early, delusion does not gain such complete authority over one's view of life. Youth, then, is not only a time of pleasure and possibility in the worldly sense. It is a time of tremendous spiritual leverage. A little practice can go far. A little humility can save years of pain. A little right view can prevent countless wrong turns. And yet youth rarely sees itself clearly. That is one of its deepest illusions. The young may understand death as an idea, but not yet as a pressure in the blood. They may know that aging exists, but they still experience themselves as exceptions. They may have seen illness in others, but their own body still feels like a promise rather than a warning. This is not a moral failure, it is part of the enchantment of being young. The sun is high, and because the light is strong, shadow seems small. The body recovers, and so one imagines recovery will always come. The heart is praised, desired, admired, and so one begins to build a self around appearance, momentum, and social reflection. In such a climate, the Dhamma can seem noble, beautiful, even true, but somehow not yet urgent. That not yet has swallowed many lives. Not because those lives were evil, but because they were distracted, pulled outward by excitement, by competition, by romance, by comparison, by the hunger to become someone impressive in the eyes of others. Many spend their strongest years feeding what cannot satisfy. They chase status, and the status must be maintained. They chase pleasure, and the pleasure fades almost as soon as it is touched. They chase recognition, and recognition becomes another form of dependence. They chase identity, and identity becomes another burden to defend. The world praises this restlessness so skillfully that a person may never notice they are being led away from themselves. And all the while, the deeper work waits. The work of understanding craving instead of obeying it. The work of noticing anger before it becomes speech. The work of knowing loneliness without drowning it in noise. The work of meeting fear without immediately running toward distraction. The work of learning contentment in a culture built on dissatisfaction. The work of seeing the body clearly, not as an ornament or a tool for vanity, but as a changing, vulnerable condition. The work of seeing the mind not as a king to be served, but as a field to be trained. This is why the Buddha points to youth with such precision. Not because youth guarantees awakening, but because youth offers favorable conditions for effort. There is often more stamina. There is often greater flexibility. There is still room to establish a direction before obligations multiply, and before decline begins to demand its own heavy share of attention. If one waits too long, the same mind that once could have been trained gently may need to be retrained through much sorrow. The same habits that once were only seedlings may become roots around stone. Consider how easy it is for an unguarded habit to deepen over time. A little indulgence becomes dependence. A little resentment becomes bitterness. A little vanity becomes constant self-concern. A little carelessness in speech becomes a lifetime of wounding others and justifying it. A little dishonesty becomes fragmentation inside the heart. We often imagine that there will come a dramatic moment in later life when wisdom suddenly appears, and the mind chooses the good with ease. But without training, later life often intensifies what was already there. If greed was fed, it may become more anxious. If anger was cherished, it may become more rigid. If delusion was ignored, it may become more deeply woven into one's assumptions. Time alone does not purify the heart. Age alone does not create peace. Practice does, and practice becomes harder when the heart has spent decades rehearsing its confusions. This is why diligent effort in youth is an act of profound kindness toward one's future self. A young person who learns to pause before speaking gives an older self fewer regrets to carry. A young person who trains in generosity protects the heart from the loneliness of self-absorption. A young person who learns simplicity avoids becoming trapped in endless appetite. A young person who learns to sit quietly and know the breath is creating an inner refuge that may one day become priceless when outer supports begin to fail. There is also a noble beauty in youthful renunciation that the world often misunderstands. The world sees restraint and says, "Why so serious so soon?" The world sees discipline and says, "Enjoy life first." The world sees spiritual effort and says, "There will be time later." But the Dhamma sees something subtler. It sees that a person who can taste pleasure and still not be enslaved by it is strong. A person who can stand in the marketplace of distractions and still remember the deathless path is rare. A person who does not wait until being broken by life to begin looking inward carries a wisdom beyond their years. To practice in youth is not to reject joy. It is to refine joy. It is to discover that not every delight leads upward. Some delights drain the heart while seeming to entertain it. Some excitements leave the mind scattered and coarse. Some freedoms are only other names for bondage. But there is another happiness, quieter at first, less dramatic, less praised, and infinitely more trustworthy. It comes from self-respect, from harmlessness, from inward clarity, from knowing that one's life is not being poured away carelessly, from feeling that one is using one's strength for something worthy before that strength begins to fade. And youth does fade. Even while we speak of it, it is already changing. The face shifts, the energy varies, responsibilities increase, loss enters. The body, once taken for granted, begins to ask for patience. The mind, once able to leap, may begin to carry fatigue, grief, disappointment, or long-conditioned habits. What was once easy is no longer easy. What was once postponed now stands at the door. For this reason, the Buddha's call is not harsh. It is compassionate realism. He does not shame the young. He warns them lovingly against sleepwalking through their most capable years. He points out that the power now present in body and mind should not be wasted on what burns up quickly and leaves the heart empty. He reminds us that the chance to break through defilements is greatest when effort can still be applied with vigor. Greed can be challenged, hatred can be softened, delusion can be questioned. But this must be done while the tools for training are still within reach. To hear this rightly is not to feel panic, but gratitude. Gratitude if one is still young. Gratitude even if one is no longer young, but can still recognize what remains workable. For in truth, the teaching about youth is not only for the young in years, it is also for the young impulse still alive in the heart, the still living capacity to begin, the remaining strength that should not be postponed into fantasy. If there is clarity today, use it today. If there is energy today, use it today. If there is even a small opening toward virtue, collectedness, and wisdom, honor it before the weather changes, because the weather of life always changes. And if youth has one great spiritual value, it is this. It offers a season in which effort can be made, before conditions grow heavier, before pain distracts the body, before fear narrows the mind, before regret accumulates, before the machinery of habit has become so established that every step toward freedom feels like walking uphill against one's own history. In youth, one can still turn with relative lightness. One can still choose the path before every alternative path has carved grooves in the heart. So the wise do not merely celebrate youth, they consecrate it. They do not ask only, "What can I get from these years?" They also ask, "What can I purify in these years? What can I understand? What kind of mind am I building? What seeds am I planting that will one day become shelter or sorrow?" These are beautiful questions, protective questions, questions that save a life from being spent only on surfaces. And when such questions are taken seriously, youth becomes more than a passing brightness. It becomes fertile ground for awakening. The same energy that might have been scattered in vanity becomes steadiness. The same passion that might have become obsession becomes devotion to truth. The same courage that might have been wasted on risk becomes courage to face the mind honestly. Then youth fulfills its highest purpose, not merely to shine for a moment in the eyes of the world, but to help the heart grow free before darkness gathers. Yet youth alone is not enough, because even a young person can be shaken by suffering when health is unstable. This is why the Blessed One pointed to another precious season for practice, the time when one is healthy, when illness is light, when the body is still able to serve the heart, instead of constantly demanding rescue. It sounds simple, almost ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that most people pass over it without reverence. We notice health least when we have it most. A body that breathes evenly, walks steadily, digests food, sleeps, rises, bends, lifts, and sits without pain is often treated as something automatic, something guaranteed, something too common to be called a blessing. But the truth is much deeper. Good health is one of the hidden forms of wealth in human life. There is an old account, remembered in the villages near Savatthi, of a young weaver named Uttara. He was known for his speed at the loom, and for a temper that flared the moment his cloth was criticized. One season, fever confined him to his sleeping mat for nearly 2 months. In that stillness, unable to work, unable to argue, he began to notice his own mind for the first time, the way it reached for irritation before it reached for anything else. When his strength returned, he returned to the loom, but he also kept something from the fever, the habit of watching his own reactions before he acted on them. He would later tell his neighbors that illness had taught him in 2 months what pride had failed to teach him in 20 years. His hands had recovered their old skill, but it was his attention that had truly healed. The tragedy is that this wealth is often recognized only when it begins to disappear. A slight pain in the back can change the whole quality of a morning. A fever can make the mind dull and restless at once. A headache can turn even a gentle voice into irritation. A night without sleep can make the smallest difficulty feel overwhelming. When the body is burdened, attention is no longer free. It gets pulled downward, inward, into discomfort, weakness, fear, and fatigue. What once seemed easy suddenly becomes an effort. What once seemed meaningful can feel distant. What once seemed possible can feel postponed. This is not a failure of character. It is simply the intimate bond between body and mind. We may speak beautifully about peace, concentration, mindfulness, and insight, but anyone who has endured real sickness knows that bodily pain changes the whole inner landscape. The mind does not float above the flesh as though untouched. When the body is aching, the mind often tightens around that ache. When the nerves are strained, patience grows thin. When energy drains away, determination can flicker. Even faith, though still present, may feel harder to access through the fog of exhaustion. This is why health matters so much for practice. It is not because the body is the final goal, but because the body is the ground upon which so much effort must first stand. When one is relatively free from illness, one can sit and remain sitting. One can walk and stay aware. One can bow without strain, chant with a steady breath, serve others with available strength, study the teachings without the mind constantly breaking apart under discomfort. One can endure the friction of training more gracefully. One can stay with a difficult truth a little longer. One can begin again after failure with less heaviness. These things may sound modest, but in spiritual life, the modest conditions are often the decisive ones. A healthy body does not guarantee wisdom. It does not guarantee virtue. It does not automatically produce concentration or compassion. Many healthy people still waste their days in distraction, indulgence, vanity, and forgetfulness. So health itself is not liberation, but health creates favorable conditions. It opens a door. It offers cooperation. It gives the practitioner a chance to work with fewer immediate obstacles. And in the path of training, favorable conditions should never be despised. Think of how many wholesome actions depend on basic physical support. To rise early and sit quietly before dawn. To walk slowly with full awareness of each step. To kneel in reverence. To memorize teachings. To listen deeply without being consumed by pain. To guard the senses in daily life. To offer service to a community. To care for parents, teachers, or the vulnerable with a steady hand. To undertake simplicity not as deprivation but as freedom. To keep precepts carefully. To notice the arising of anger before it hardens into speech. To stay with grief without collapsing into despair. To meet joy without clinging. All of this asks something of the body, not everything, but something. And when the body can support these efforts, even imperfectly, we should understand that a rare support is present. Still, this teaching is not meant to make us anxious or superstitious about illness. It is not saying that only the healthy can practice, or that sickness makes the path impossible. Some of the deepest realizations in human life have arisen in the midst of pain. Some people become more sincere precisely because illness strips away illusion. When the body falters, false confidence can break, and the heart may turn toward truth with unusual urgency. So we should never look down on the sick, nor imagine that spiritual worth depends on physical strength. That would be blindness. But we must also not romanticize what sickness does. Illness can teach, yes. It can humble, clarify, and ripen insight, yet it can also exhaust, confuse, isolate, and weaken. It can narrow one's world to the next breath, the next pill, the next hour of relief. It can make concentration fragmentary. It can make irritation arise more quickly. It can make fear visit more often, especially when the future becomes uncertain. There are days when pain itself becomes the loudest voice in consciousness. To pretend otherwise is not wisdom, it is sentimentality. That is why the Buddha's guidance is so compassionate and practical. Practice while the conditions are favorable. Train while body and mind still cooperate. Do not wait for crisis to force seriousness upon you. If the body is presently able, then today is not an ordinary day. Today is support. Today is opportunity. Today is a field in which effort can take root more readily. Many people live as though health were permanent. And because of that assumption, they delay the work that matters most. They tell themselves they will learn patience later, meditate later, simplify later, reconcile later, serve later, let go later. But later is one of the most fragile words in human life. A single diagnosis can change its meaning. A single accident can erase its comfort. A single season of weakness can reveal how much was postponed under the illusion of abundance. So when health is present, the wise do not merely enjoy it, they honor it by using it well. To use health well does not mean becoming obsessed with the body, decorating it with pride, or worshipping vitality as though it were identity. It means understanding health as a temporary gift, a borrowed condition, not fully ours, not fully controllable, not destined to remain. This body is made of causes and conditions. It changes with age, with climate, with food, with stress, with karma, with time. It cannot be commanded to stay strong forever. To cling to health is delusion, but to neglect health is also delusion. The middle way is gratitude joined with responsibility. Gratitude says, "This body is still serving me today." Responsibility says, "Then let me use it for what is noble. Let me sit while I can still sit. Let me walk mindfully while my legs can still carry me. Let me bow while my spine can still bend. Let me study while memory still holds. Let me serve while energy still rises in the morning. Let me train the mind now before pain becomes my constant tutor. Let me learn how craving moves, how anger burns, how fear speaks, how attachment disguises itself. Let me become familiar with the heart in calm weather, so that when storms come, I am not meeting myself for the first time. That last point is so important. Good health gives us more than comfort. It gives us the chance to prepare. When people are healthy, they often believe they are simply enjoying ease. But from the standpoint of practice, they are also standing in a training ground. They can learn to steady attention before attention is shattered by suffering. They can cultivate kindness before irritability deepens under pain. They can contemplate impermanence before loss becomes intimate. They can establish refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha before fear starts searching wildly for something to hold. They can train in letting go while the conditions are still gentle enough to allow repetition, correction, and growth. If we wait until illness comes to begin all of this, we may still begin, and that is good. But the work will be harder. The body may no longer cooperate. The mind may not have the stamina to stay collected. Emotional reactions may be sharper. Small discomforts may become large disturbances. Even remembering the teachings can become difficult when one is heavily burdened by pain. So to practice in health is not a luxury. It is foresight. And yet there is something tender here too. Good health should not make us proud of ourselves, as if strength were a personal achievement that places us above others. Many healthy people become subtly arrogant. They judge the weak, dismiss the elderly, and assume discipline is easy because their present conditions happen to be favorable. But health can vanish from anyone. The strong can become dependent. The independent can become fragile. The one who now walks swiftly may one day need help to rise from a chair. If health is seen clearly, it does not inflate the ego, it softens it. It makes one humble, patient, and compassionate toward all beings who live in vulnerable bodies. This humility becomes part of the practice itself. When we see health as uncertain, we stop using it merely to chase pleasure. We begin to treasure what can be built through it. Steadiness, generosity, restraint, clarity, devotion, and insight. We begin to understand that a painless day is not just a day for entertainment. A peaceful morning is not just empty space to be filled. Strength is not merely for ambition. Energy is not merely for consumption. These can all be converted into the path. A person in good health can take on disciplines that shape the heart quietly over time. They can maintain a daily meditation practice instead of depending only on inspiration. They can chant not mechanically, but with collected feeling. They can read and contemplate the discourses patiently. They can observe speech and notice how often the impulse to exaggerate, defend, gossip, or wound tries to arise. They can serve a monastery, a teacher, a family member, or a community without resenting every physical task. They can undertake fasting, simplicity, silence, or wakefulness with care and balance. They can train in generosity before fear of loss becomes stronger. They can purify conduct while the mind still has enough lightness to choose wisely again and again. This is how health becomes spiritual wealth, not by being possessed, but by being directed. And perhaps one of the most beautiful uses of health is this: to prepare the mind so deeply that when illness eventually arrives, as it does for nearly everyone, one is not entirely defeated by it. The body may still hurt, fear may still visit, sadness may still arise, but the mind will have some training, some refuge, some familiarity with impermanence, some skill in not believing every panic, some strength in returning to the breath, to loving kindness, to truth. Then even sickness, though difficult, will meet a heart that has been cultivated. This is no small blessing. So if today the body is not racked with pain, if breath is available, if the limbs respond, if the mind can still focus, if you can still choose effort over delay, then recognize the rarity of this moment. Health is not merely comfort, it is permission, it is support. It is a quiet companion saying, "Use me well while I remain." And if health gives the body a stable ground, then material sufficiency gives the practitioner something just as important: time. Time. Such a small word, and yet for so many people it feels like the rarest treasure in the world. There are days when a human being does not really live from morning to night, but merely chases survival through the hours. The mind wakes already burdened. Before the sun has fully risen, there is already counting. What is left in the bank account? What bill is due? What debt is waiting? What child needs school fees? What parent needs medicine? What rent must be paid? What food must somehow appear on the table by evening? Even while eating, the mind cannot taste. Even while speaking, the heart is half absent. Even while sitting still, inwardly one is running. This is one of the quiet hardships of worldly life. A person may look ordinary from the outside, may still go to work, still smile, still answer messages, still fulfill obligations, but within the whole field of consciousness is occupied. It is occupied by pressure, by calculation, by urgency, by the low unbroken hum of insecurity. Not always dramatic, not always visible, but relentless. And when the mind is pressed in this way day after day, it becomes difficult to remember higher things. Not because one is bad, not because one lacks faith, not because one does not care for the path, but because exhaustion narrows vision. Survival has a way of pulling attention downward until all energy is spent on getting through the next day, then the next. This is why the Buddha spoke so practically about the conditions that support practice. The Dhamma is profound, but it is never naive. It does not pretend that a person crushed by constant hunger, debt, fear, and overwork can easily enter calm reflection at will. It does not scold the drowning person for failing to admire the moon. It sees clearly that when life is unstable at the most basic level, the mind is repeatedly dragged into worry. And a worried mind, though still capable of goodness, often lacks the spaciousness needed for deep cultivation. When livelihood does not devour the day, something precious appears, not luxury, not idleness, not a life without duties, simply space, a little room in the schedule, a little room in the heart, enough that one can pause and listen, enough that one can sit quietly for a while without panic rising immediately from unfinished survival tasks, enough that one can hear the teachings not as beautiful words passing by, but as medicine entering the bloodstream. To have enough means, in the deepest sense, that one is not swallowed whole by the fight to survive. This is an important distinction, because the world often confuses enough with abundance, and abundance with success. But the favorable condition the Buddha points to is much simpler and much more humane. It is not a palace. It is not endless wealth. It is not indulgence. It is not the intoxication of having more than others. It is the blessing of sufficiency. Food is available. Shelter is steady enough. Essential needs can be met without the mind torn apart every hour by fear. One can work, but work does not consume every drop of life. One can provide, but providing does not leave the heart permanently starved. When that kind of sufficiency is present, the path becomes more accessible in very concrete ways. One has time to hear the Dhamma, time to reflect on what one has heard, time to notice one's own mind instead of only reacting to outer demands, time to keep precepts carefully, time to sit in meditation, even if only for a little while each day, time to visit good companions in the path, time to recover some tenderness, some honesty, some inward collectedness. Even 1 hour not ruled by economic fear can become sacred if used well. Think of how much inner life is possible when one is not constantly calculating survival. A teaching heard in the morning can be remembered at noon. A moment of irritation can be studied instead of immediately obeyed. A painful memory can be met with mindfulness rather than drowned in more frantic activity. Gratitude can arise naturally. Generosity becomes possible. Patience becomes less fragile. The mind, no longer cornered all the time, can begin to turn toward freedom. And this is not because material ease itself is liberation. It is not. Many people possess comfort and remain deeply restless. Many have full tables and empty hearts. Many have time, money, convenience, and pleasure, yet still suffer from greed, fear, loneliness, vanity, anger, and confusion. So we should be very clear. Having enough does not save us by itself. It only provides a favorable opening. It creates conditions in which effort can be directed inward. if wisdom is present. That if matters, because comfort can move in two opposite directions. The same ease that gives one time to practice can also become the very ground of forgetfulness. When hardship loosens its grip, heedlessness can quietly enter. One says, "Now I can relax," and relaxation turns into carelessness. One says, "I finally deserve enjoyment," and enjoyment turns into endless consumption. One says, "There will be time later," and later becomes a habit of postponement. Days drift by in entertainment, distraction, comfort-seeking, and subtle intoxication. The body is fed, the house is maintained, the devices are charged, the calendar is full, and yet the heart remains unattended. This is one of the gentlest traps in human life. Great suffering sometimes shocks people awake, but moderate comfort can lull them to sleep for years. So when enough has been given, wisdom asks a serious question. What will you do with this blessing? Will you spend your stability strengthening attachment, decorating self-image, and multiplying desires? Or will you convert this rare breathing room into practice? Will you use your evenings only to scatter the mind, or sometimes to gather it? Will you use your resources merely to satisfy craving, or also to support generosity, simplicity, and virtue? Will your relative ease become a cushion for forgetfulness, or a foundation for awakening? This is where the teaching becomes intimate. It is no longer about society in general. It is about the way each one of us meets our own conditions. Someone with very little free time may still practice heroically. Someone with many advantages may waste them completely. So the point is not to compare lives. The point is to recognize support when it is present and not squander it. If your livelihood is manageable, if your basic needs are not screaming every day, if you can breathe without immediate terror over food, rent, or debt, then you have something immensely valuable. You have usable life. You have recoverable attention. You have a chance to turn toward what truly matters before old age, illness, and death close in. How many people tell themselves that they will practice after one more financial milestone, after one more promotion, after one more purchase, after one more season of striving? Yet craving rarely announces an endpoint. The finish line moves. Needs become wants, wants become habits, habits become identities. One spends years building the outer container and almost no time training the mind that must live inside it. Meanwhile, the heart waits. It waits through commutes and meetings, through overtime and receipts, through the endless practical demands that seem so urgent. They leave no silence behind them. And sometimes, if one is fortunate, there comes a pause, a season when work is stable enough, a season when the family is secure enough, a season when the basic storms subside enough that one can finally hear the quieter truth. This human life is not meant only for maintenance. It is not meant only for earning, buying, repairing, consuming, and worrying. It is also meant for understanding, for purification, for release. To realize this is already a kind of awakening of values. Then one begins to use material sufficiency differently. Money becomes not merely a tool for pleasure, but a support for ethical living. A home becomes not merely a place to collapse, but a place where mindfulness can be cultivated. A stable schedule becomes not merely room for more amusement, but room for prayer, contemplation, study, meditation, and acts of care. The day is no longer devoured entirely by the machinery of survival. Some part of it is returned to the soul. And what a difference that makes. With a little time, one can sit and observe the breath. With repeated observation, one notices the restlessness of desire. With honesty, one sees how much suffering comes not from lack alone, but from endless wanting. With reflection, one starts to appreciate contentment. With contentment, the fever of comparison cools. With a cooler heart, generosity becomes easier. With generosity, the self softens. With a softened self, the teachings penetrate more deeply. In this way, even ordinary material stability, when used wisely, become part of the path toward freedom, not the goal, but support for the goal. And this support should inspire humility, not pride. For no one creates favorable conditions entirely alone. Behind every manageable livelihood are countless visible and invisible causes. The labor of others, the functioning of society, the help of family, the reliability of institutions, the absence of disaster, the simple luck of circumstance. To recognize this is to become grateful rather than arrogant, and gratitude itself protects the mind. It reminds us that enough is not a possession to cling to, but an opportunity to use well. So if at this point in your life you have enough, truly enough, then do not underestimate what stands in your hands. Even modest sufficiency can be a gate to profound practice. Guard it. Simplify around it. Do not let unnecessary desire steal all the time that sufficiency has made possible. Let your livelihood serve life, not replace it. Let your earnings support clarity, not only appetite. Let your schedule include moments in which nothing is being bought, solved, or chased, and the heart can finally learn to be still. Because one day conditions may change. Work may become uncertain. Costs may rise, responsibilities may multiply, strength may decline, the mind that had time may lose it. The person who once could sit quietly may become entangled again in demands they did not foresee. This is why a favorable time should not be treated casually. It is fragile, it is impermanent, and precisely for that reason, it should be honored. Use enough while enough is here. Use it to study what the Buddha taught. Use it to examine the movements of greed and fear. Use it to cultivate virtue that does not depend on mood. Use it to deepen concentration. Use it to remember what no paycheck can purchase and no market can guarantee. Peace of heart born from understanding reality as it is. Yet even when one's own household is stable, one's own body is well enough, and one's own livelihood is manageable, practice is not protected from every disturbance. A person may enjoy personal ease and still be shaken by forces far larger than the individual life. For beyond private sufficiency lies another condition just as vital, the condition of the world around us. There is a kind of blessing so ordinary that people often stop seeing it. It is the blessing of waking in a place where the night passed without explosions, where the road outside still exists in the morning, where the market opens, where children can walk, where neighbors greet one another, where the roof has not been torn away by storm or fire, where one can think about the Dhamma, because one is not first forced to run for one's life. This too is a favorable time for practice. Not merely personal comfort, not merely private convenience, but the wider condition of peace in the land. The Buddha pointed to this with great realism. Practice does not happen in abstraction. It does not unfold in a vacuum, untouched by weather, politics, hunger, violence, or social collapse. We may speak beautifully about meditation, virtue, mindfulness, and liberation, but when war reaches a region, when famine spreads, when floodwaters rise, when fire consumes homes, when law and order crumble, human life is pulled into a different urgency. In such moments, survival rightfully demands the front of the mind. The body becomes alert to danger, sleep becomes uncertain, food becomes a question, family becomes a responsibility carried with fear. A person may long to practice, may even treasure the teachings deeply, and yet the conditions around them press so heavily that sustained cultivation becomes difficult in ways that peaceful people often fail to understand. Imagine the difference. In times of peace, a person can sit quietly and observe the breath. In times of conflict, that same person may be listening for footsteps, sirens, gunfire, or the sound that means it is time to flee. In times of peace, one can reflect on moral discipline and speak gently, carefully, thoughtfully. In times of chaos, speech may be reduced to warnings, bargaining, pleading, or silence born of fear. In times of peace, one can choose simplicity. In times of disaster, simplicity is no longer a conscious virtue, it is enforced loss. The mind that might have turned inward toward understanding is dragged outward again and again by threat, uncertainty, and grief. This is not a criticism of anyone living through hardship. It is an acknowledgement of reality. If a village, if a country is at war, if crops fail, if disease spreads, if homes burn, if civil trust fractures, then contemplation becomes hard, not because the Dhamma has lost its value, but because conditions have turned harsh. Even those with faith may not have the stability needed to protect and deepen it. One day is spent searching for food, another day is spent relocating family, another is spent rebuilding, mourning, waiting, enduring. The mind cannot easily gather itself when the world around it is scattering everything. That is why peace, safety, and social order are not small things. They are not merely secular conveniences. They are powerful supports for the path. A peaceful land gives more than comfort. It gives continuity. It gives the possibility of routine. It gives time enough to keep precepts carefully, to listen to teachings, to visit monasteries, to serve the community, to practice generosity, to study, to chant, to meditate, to return again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. This repeated returning matters. The path is not usually walked in one burst of inspiration. It is walked in steady steps, and steady steps are easier where life is not constantly being shattered. When the streets are safe, one can travel to hear the Dhamma. When the temple stands undisturbed, practitioners can gather. When food can be found without desperation, the mind is less consumed by panic. When schools function, families are less overwhelmed. When the law still carries weight, cruelty does not move as freely. When communities remain intact, people can support one another in visible and invisible ways. All of this creates what the tradition so wisely recognizes as favorable conditions, the kind of conditions in which the path can actually be practiced, not merely admired from a distance. There is something deeply humbling in this. Many people like to think of spiritual life as entirely personal, as though effort alone were enough. Effort is essential, yes, but effort always rests within conditions. We do not choose the century into which we are born. We do not choose whether our homeland will know calm or upheaval. We do not control earthquakes, storms, political collapse, or the violence of masses. To recognize the importance of peace is to recognize interdependence. My ability to sit quietly this evening is connected to countless visible and invisible causes. Farmers who grew the food, workers who maintained the roads, people who upheld order, weather that did not destroy the harvest, leaders who did not plunge the nation into ruin, neighbors who did not turn against one another, a community still functioning well enough that ordinary life continues. The chance to practice is not mine by personal merit alone. It is supported by a whole field of conditions. And because this is so, gratitude becomes part of wisdom. Not sentimental gratitude, not naive gratitude that pretends the world is perfect, but clear-eyed gratitude for ordinary stability. A roof that still stands is not ordinary when one remembers those who sleep under torn plastic or open sky. Streets that are safe are not ordinary when one remembers places where every journey risks robbery, shelling, or disappearance. Food that can be purchased is not ordinary when one remembers the fear of empty shelves, failed harvests, or hunger that tightens the body and narrows the mind. A temple that remains open is not ordinary when one remembers communities where sacred places have been destroyed, abandoned, censored, or silenced. To live where people can gather, bow, chant, listen, and practice without terror is a blessing of immense spiritual value. How often people postpone the work of the heart because peace feels permanent. They say, "I will practice later when I have more time." But what is this later built upon? It is built upon assumptions that the nation will remain stable, that disaster will not arrive, that prices will remain manageable, that roads will stay open, that family will stay safe, that institutions will continue to function. History offers no guarantee of such things. Entire societies have changed in a few years, even a few months. A city can appear strong and become broken. A familiar neighborhood can become a place of evacuation. One generation may inherit order and imagine it natural, only to learn how fragile it was. So when peace is present, wisdom says, do not waste it. If the air is calm, breathe deeply and practice. If the roads are open, go hear the teachings. If the monastery still stands, support it and learn there. If your home is safe tonight, let that safety become a foundation for recollection, rather than an excuse for forgetfulness. If you can sleep without fear, then wake with purpose. Use the quiet conditions of your life to cultivate the kind of mind that can meet change when it comes. Because change will come. Even peaceful lands are not free from impermanence. Flood may come after years of clear weather. Fire may come after long security. Economic hardship may come where abundance once seemed assured. Division may arise where harmony once felt stable. The point is not to live anxiously, waiting for collapse. The point is to live wisely, understanding that worldly conditions are uncertain and therefore precious. A favorable season should not be spent in complacency. It should be turned into practice while it is still here. There is also another subtle danger in peaceful times. Outer calm can lull people inwardly. When life runs smoothly, one may become entertained, distracted, sleepy in the spirit. Because nothing urgent is pressing from outside, one invents urgency from within, cravings, comparisons, ambitions, endless busyness. So peace in the land does not automatically become peace in the heart. It only becomes support if it is used well. A quiet country can still contain restless minds. Safe streets can still house greed, resentment, and delusion. Yet this does not reduce the value of peace. It increases responsibility. If conditions are gentle and still we fail to practice, then what exactly are we waiting for? The wise person looks at a stable society and sees not a backdrop to be ignored, but an opening. Here is a season in which generosity can mature because people have enough to share. Here is a season in which virtue can be protected because chaos is not constantly tearing at it. Here is a season in which meditation can be cultivated because one is not always interrupted by emergency. Here is a season in which children can be taught, elders can be cared for, communities can gather, and teachings can be preserved. Peace is not only the absence of violence, it is the presence of room. Room to reflect, room to restrain, room to listen, room to awaken. And what a sacred thing that room is. Think of the simple blessings that support a single hour of practice. A lamp works, a door closes. Rain is not pouring through the ceiling. No one is pounding at the gate in panic. The road to the temple is passable. The teacher can teach. The listener can listen. The mind, though still troubled in many ways, is not cornered by immediate catastrophe. Such conditions may seem unremarkable until they vanish, but once they vanish, their value becomes unmistakable. This is why gratitude should come before loss, not only after it. To understand this deeply is to soften in compassion as well. One no longer judges harshly those whose practice appears inconsistent when their lives are shaped by instability, violence, or displacement. One sees that suffering wears many forms, and that external conditions can either nourish or obstruct the inner path. This understanding should make us both humbler and kinder. If we have peace, let us use it. If others do not, let us not boast about our discipline as though it arose without support. Let us practice in a way that includes thankfulness, realism, and care for the wider world. For the Dhamma does not ask us to deny circumstances. It invites us to understand them. And among the conditions that favor growth in the path, a peaceful land is a treasure. Not an ultimate refuge, certainly, because no nation, no society, no climate, no political order can stand forever. But while such peace lasts, it is a rare and meaningful ally. Under its shelter, one can train the heart before harsher winds arrive. Under its shelter, one can learn what endures when outer security does not. Under its shelter, One can prepare not by hoarding possessions, but by deepening wisdom, compassion, restraint, and clarity. So if you are living in a time and place where the sky is not filled with smoke, where the ground is not shaking under conflict, where the community still functions, where spiritual life is still possible, do not overlook the blessing. Bow to it inwardly, respect it by using it well. Let the peace around you become strength within you. Let stability in the world support stability of mind. Let the ordinary mercy of a livable day become fuel for the work that truly matters. And yet, even in peaceful times, the path becomes dim if the living community of practice is fractured or absent. A traveling merchant named Sona once described this to a fellow trader on the road to Rajagaha. For years he had lived in a quiet, prosperous town, untouched by war, and yet he confessed that his practice had grown thin there, because no one around him ever spoke of the Dhamma or asked how his mind was doing. He ate well, slept well, and slowly forgot why any of it mattered. It was only when he began stopping at a small forest monastery on his trade route, sitting for an hour with monks who asked him plain questions about his greed and his fear, that the peace of his town finally became useful to him. He said the land had given him safety, but the Sangha had given him a reason to use it. For the Buddha's teaching does not remain in the world by words alone. It does not survive merely because books exist, or because sacred phrases are remembered, or because people speak the Buddha's name with respect. The Dhamma remains visible because there are human beings who receive it carefully, live it sincerely, protect it faithfully, and pass it on compassionately. There are those who study, those who contemplate, those who practice, those who preserve discipline, those who teach with patience, and those whose very way of walking, speaking, eating, listening, and enduring difficulty becomes a quiet sermon. This is why the fifth favorable time is so precious, when the Sangha is harmonious, pure, and worthy of trust. A united Sangha is not only a religious institution, it is a living bridge between the Buddha and the generations that come after him. Through that bridge, the teaching crosses time. Through that bridge, what was awakened under the Bodhi tree continues to touch wounded minds, confused hearts, and weary lives. If there were no monastics, no elders, no sincere practitioners, no communities gathered around restraint, study, meditation, and truthfulness, then the Dhamma would slowly become distant. It might still be admired, quoted, even praised, but it would no longer be so easily encountered as a living path. This is something many people do not fully see. They think the teaching is available because it has been written down. But words on a page, however precious, are not enough for most of us. We need to hear the teaching spoken by a voice that has tasted its meaning. We need to ask questions when confusion arises. We need correction when the mind wanders into self-deception. We need examples of humility, restraint, forgiveness, steadiness, and contentment. We need to witness what it looks like when a human life is gradually shaped by the Dhamma. Without that living embodiment, the path becomes abstract. Noble ideas remain noble, but they no longer enter the blood and breath of ordinary life. That is why a harmonious Sangha is such a blessing. It is a field of refuge in a restless world. It is a place where discipline is not mocked but respected. A place where the teachings are not bent to flatter greed, anger, or delusion, but are carefully preserved in their liberating purpose. A place where seekers can come not only to listen, but to observe. They can watch how elders handle praise and blame. They can see how practitioners relate to food, comfort, sickness, disagreement, and uncertainty. They can notice the beauty of small things. A measured tone of voice, a willingness to yield, a carefulness with speech, a simplicity in possessions, a reverence for practice that does not need display. In such a community, the Dhamma is not merely announced, it is demonstrated. It breathes in the ordinary rhythm of shared life. One may hear a teaching on patience, and then see patience embodied in the face of inconvenience. One may hear a teaching on renunciation, and then witness contentment in people who do not chase excess. One may hear of loving kindness, and then feel it in the way one is received, corrected, or guided. The ears learn from the sermon, but the heart learns from the atmosphere. This is one of the quiet miracles of a pure Sangha. It teaches even when no formal discourse is being given. The arrangement of sandals at a temple door, the silence before dawn practice, the care with which chants are recited, the gentleness shown to the old and the sick, the restraint in conversation, the refusal to turn spiritual life into a contest of personalities, all of these become part of the training. To encounter such a community is to be reminded that awakening is not a fantasy. It leaves traces, it changes conduct, it purifies intention, it makes a life lighter, simpler, and more trustworthy. And a harmonious Sangha does more than inspire. It protects. It protects the teachings from distortion. It protects the vulnerable from confusion. It protects future generations from spiritual famine. The Buddha's path is subtle. It can easily be misunderstood by a mind still charmed by ego. We may take indulgence for freedom, pride passivity for peace, or blind belief for wisdom. Left to ourselves, we can twist the Dhamma until it serves our preferences instead of uprooting them. But in a healthy spiritual community, there is a framework that helps keep the path clear. There is Vinaya, restraint, accountability, lineage, memory, and shared devotion to what is true rather than what is convenient. Because of that, the Sangha deserves deep reverence. Not because robes alone are sacred, and not because every individual is perfect, but because the role itself is immense. To leave behind worldly pursuits, to train in discipline, to study the teaching, to preserve it, to offer guidance, to receive people's suffering without seeking personal gain. This is noble labor. It is one of the great mercies in the world. Through such people, the compassionate work of the Buddha continues. Through them, the lost are reminded of direction. Through them, those who are discouraged can regain confidence. Through them, the Dhamma does not remain sealed in the past, but walks among the living. We bow, then, not in superstition, but in gratitude. We honor the Sangha as great teachers, those who in countless ways continue the Blessed One's work. They do not carry the Dhamma forward for fame. They do not truly serve the path for applause. At their best, they serve according to conditions, teaching when teaching is needed, remaining silent when silence is wiser, correcting when correction helps, encouraging when hearts are weak. They become examples not by self-devastate, but by steadiness. In this way, they stand in the world as a profound gift. There is something deeply moving in this. The Buddha has passed beyond. We cannot sit at his feet in the ancient forests of India. We cannot directly hear his voice in the human tone with which he once comforted the grieving, challenged the proud, or instructed the sincere. And yet, because the Sangha has endured, because communities of practice have held the lamp through centuries of darkness and change, we are not abandoned. The path can still be found. The teachings can still be heard. The training can still be undertaken. The stream of compassion has not dried up. When the Sangha lives in concord, this blessing becomes even greater. Harmony does not mean that every personality is identical, or that no disagreement ever arises. It means there is commitment to truth over ego, to reconciliation over division, to discipline over carelessness, to the shared purpose over private ambition. It means the community knows how to endure friction without breaking apart. It means that correction can happen without hatred, and diversity of temperament can exist without fragmentation of principle. Such harmony is beautiful because it is hard-won. It requires humility. It requires restraint. It requires remembering why the robe was put on, why the training began, and whom the teaching is meant to benefit. For the ordinary person who approaches such a Sangha, the benefit is immeasurable. A seeker may arrive burdened, skeptical, ashamed, restless, or spiritually tired. Yet in the presence of a community grounded in practice, something begins to settle. One sees that another way of living is possible. One feels the difference between noise and quiet, between craving and contentment, between performance and sincerity. Faith may arise, not as blind emotion, but as confidence born of contact. Yes, the heart begins to say, this path can be lived. These teachings can shape a real human life. Liberation is not only an idea, and that confidence matters. Many people do not continue on the path because they have never seen it lived well. They may read profound teachings and still remain uncertain. They may admire wisdom from afar but not know how to begin. They may even want to practice, but without guidance they drift, hesitate, or become entangled in extremes. A harmonious Sangha shortens this distance. It brings the path near. It translates lofty truth into visible conduct. It gives not only doctrine, but orientation. This is why the weakening of the Sangha is a spiritual tragedy. When division enters deeply, when corruption spreads, when discipline is neglected, when teachings are diluted for popularity, when the robe becomes a means for gain, status, or manipulation, the damage reaches far beyond one place or one moment. It harms trust. It confuses the sincere. It gives the careless an excuse to turn away. It leaves the vulnerable without clear refuge. It darkens the image of the path in the minds of future generations. And perhaps the saddest part is that though future generations may never fully know what they have lost, if living examples disappear, many will assume that the Dhamma is only theory. If true training communities become rare, people may think the path itself is unrealistic. If few embody restraint and wisdom, then greed-driven forms of spirituality can begin to look normal. In that atmosphere, the words of liberation remain, but their living fragrance fades. The map survives, yet there are fewer and fewer people who have walked the terrain. Then a person seeking freedom may stand before shelves of teachings and still feel alone. They may hear many opinions but find little clarity. They may encounter spiritual language everywhere and genuine transformation almost nowhere. And because of this, delay becomes easier, doubt becomes stronger, practice becomes more isolated. What should have been supported by community becomes a private struggle, carried without enough guidance, encouragement, or correction. This is why one should never take a good Sangha lightly. If there is a community where integrity is honored, where practice is real, where the teachings are preserved carefully, where spiritual friendship is possible, where one can listen and learn and observe and be reminded of what matters, that is a rare blessing. It is one of the favorable times for striving. It is not guaranteed to remain. Conditions change, communities decline, elders pass away, institutions weaken. What is bright today can become dim tomorrow if not valued and supported with sincerity. So when such a Sangha exists, one should draw near with respect. Learn while teachers are still teaching. Practice while guidance is still available. Clarify understanding while questions can still be asked. Train the heart while there are still living examples to encourage perseverance. Do not wait until confusion spreads, until trustworthy voices are scarce, until division has done its work, until the opportunity has quietly slipped away. To honor the Sangha is also to understand its burden. Those who preserve the teaching do so for the welfare of many. They hold memory for those who forget. They maintain standards in an age that constantly relaxes them. They keep the path open not only for themselves, but for strangers not yet born. Their service is often quiet. Their sacrifices may go unnoticed. Yet because of them, someone in sorrow may hear a liberating truth. Someone in despair may discover a practice. Someone in moral confusion may find a compass. Someone standing on the edge of wasted years may turn inward and begin again. This is why reverence here is fitting and beautiful. Homage to the Sangha, the great teachers, who carry forward the sublime way of the Blessed One. According to conditions, they guide beings without self-seeking, becoming noble examples who lead the world. Such reverence is not ornamental. It is an expression of understanding. We are acknowledging a sacred continuity. We are recognizing that the Buddha's compassion still reaches the world through those who preserve and embody his path. And if we are fortunate enough to live at a time when such a Sangha still exists, then we are living in one of the rare favorable seasons for practice. The teaching is not lost. The lamp is not extinguished. The refuge is still available. The gate is still open. But once these 5 times are named, a deeper question begins to stir. If youth is a blessing, if health is a blessing, if material sufficiency is a blessing, if peace in the land is a blessing, and if a harmonious Sangha is a blessing, then why do so many still postpone the work of awakening? Why do human beings delay even when conditions are kind, even when the path stands before them, even when blessings are already resting in their hands? Because the mind has a way of bowing to truth in principle while quietly refusing it in practice. We hear that life is uncertain, and we nod. We hear that youth fades, health changes, opportunities close, and death does not announce its arrival. And still some hidden part of us whispers, not yet, not now, later, when things settle down, later, when I understand more, later, when I have solved the practical burdens of living, later, when the world becomes less demanding and the heart feels more ready. This inner voice is so familiar that many no longer recognize it as a form of delusion. It sounds reasonable. It sounds responsible. It even sounds wise. It says, first build your life, then turn toward the spirit. First establish your career, then practice deeply. First marry, then there will be time. First raise the children, then there will be quiet. First survive this season, this pressure, this grief, this obligation. And after that, the path can begin in earnest. And when one season passes, another appears. When one burden lifts, another takes its place. What was postponed for a year becomes postponed for 10. What was imagined as a temporary delay slowly hardens into a way of life. The danger is not always dramatic. Often it is soft. It arrives dressed as ordinary living. A person may not reject the Dharma. They may admire it, respect it, even love it. But admiration is not the same as practice. Respect is not the same as training the mind. Love for truth, if it never enters one's choices, remains only a beautiful thought. And so a person can spend years standing near the shore of the path, speaking warmly of the crossing, yet never stepping into the boat. Why does this happen? Because the untrained mind is deeply attached to the feeling of continuity. It wants to believe that tomorrow will resemble today, and next year will resemble this year, and that our current strength, our current freedom, our current access to the teachings will simply remain. We do not only postpone because we are lazy. We postpone because we are enchanted by the illusion of abundance. We assume there will be more time, more clarity, more energy, more favorable conditions. We treat life as if it were a store that will remain open indefinitely, though in truth its doors can close at any hour. There is also a strange sleepiness that comes with comfort. When life is painful, we often remember to ask deeper questions. Suffering can make the heart raw, humble, and sincere. But when life becomes manageable, when food is available, shelter is stable, the body is mostly well, and the days move along without major threat, then urgency often fades. We begin to live as though safety were permanent. We become less attentive, less honest, less awake. We say, I am fine for now, and in that small sentence the whole spiritual life can be postponed. Comfort is not the enemy. Blessings are not the problem. The problem is forgetfulness. The problem is that pleasant conditions can intoxicate the mind just as much as painful ones can overwhelm it. A person who is suffering may be distracted by fear, but a person who is comfortable may be distracted by ease. One burns with anxiety. The other drifts into spiritual drowsiness. Both can miss the moment that is actually available. This is why favorable conditions are so precious and so easily wasted. Youth can become a field of distraction. Health can become an excuse for carelessness. Material stability can become a net of endless consumption. Peace can become complacency. Even living near the teachings can become ordinary to us. What is rare, we begin to treat as common. What is sacred, we begin to handle casually. The very gifts that should inspire gratitude and effort can, if mindfulness is absent, become the reason we delay. There is another subtle trap, the fantasy of the perfect future self. Many people imagine that true practice belongs to a later version of themselves. A calmer self, a more disciplined self, a less wounded self. They think, when I am emotionally balanced, then I will meditate seriously. When I have more time, then I will study. When I have fewer responsibilities, then I will live simply. When my mind is less restless, then I will begin training it. But this is like saying, when I am no longer thirsty, then I will drink. Practice is not something reserved for ideal conditions, because ideal conditions do not exist in the way we imagine. Life has always been mixed. Even in times of peace, there is uncertainty. Even in health, there is vulnerability. Even in love, there is loss. Even in prosperity, there is fear. The mind that waits for a perfect future is usually trying to avoid the humility of beginning now, in the middle of imperfection, in the middle of noise, in the middle of one's actual human life. And avoidance is clever. It does not always look like refusal. Sometimes it looks like endless entertainment. One more episode, one more scroll, one more hour dissolved into trivial images that ask nothing from us and leave nothing behind. Sometimes it looks like overwork, where busyness becomes a badge of importance and exhaustion is mistaken for meaning. Sometimes it looks like emotional numbness, a quiet dulling of the inner life so that we do not have to feel how quickly time is passing. Sometimes it looks like social comparison, where the mind stays preoccupied with who is ahead, who is admired, who is secure, who is behind, and thus never settles enough to ask, what am I doing with this precious life? Sometimes avoidance even wears spiritual clothing. A person reads endlessly, collects teachings, quotes wisdom, follows discussions, admires teachers, and yet does not sit, does not reflect deeply, does not restrain harmful habits, does not train the heart in generosity, virtue, and insight. The ego can hide inside spiritual interest just as easily as it hides inside worldly ambition. We can become connoisseurs of the path without becoming walkers of the path. The Buddha's teaching does not condemn this with cruelty. It reveals it with compassion. It understands the mind's weakness. It understands habit, fear, craving, and confusion. But because it is compassionate, it is also honest. It does not flatter us by saying there is no danger in delay. It does not soothe us with the comforting lie that we can begin any time and lose nothing. It tells us plainly, conditions are unstable. Opportunity is fragile. The mind that is not trained will not naturally choose freedom. It will drift toward what is easy, familiar, stimulating, and immediately rewarding, even when those things quietly deepen bondage. This is compassionate realism. It does not speak to frighten us for the sake of fear. It speaks to awaken responsibility. It reminds us that postponement is not neutral. Every delay shapes the heart. Every repeated excuse strengthens a pattern. Every time we say, later, we teach the mind to trust distraction more than truth. And over the years, this becomes character. It becomes destiny, not because we were punished, but because we were practiced. We become what we repeatedly permit. Think of how many lives are spent in this trance. People rush from milestone to milestone, convinced that peace lies just beyond the next achievement. After success, then I will rest. After marriage, then I will turn inward. After the children grow, then I will reflect. After retirement, then I will devote myself to what matters. After this financial pressure ends, after this family tension resolves, after this crisis passes, after this final task is completed, Yet life does not unfold as a tidy queue of completed obligations. It moves like weather. New winds arrive before the old ones disappear. The horizon keeps shifting. And if the heart has not learned to practice amid changing conditions, it will not suddenly become free when the calendar opens. Even retirement, which many imagine as a spiritual harvest, is not guaranteed to bring clarity. By then the body may be tired, the mind more set in its habits, the senses less sharp, the energy less resilient. The long postponed work of inner transformation may feel heavier, not lighter. The grooves of distraction may be deeper. The old emotional reflexes may be stronger. What we delay in youth often returns in age with interest. And there is a sadness in this, not because people are bad, but because they are so human. They do not mean to waste their lives. They are simply carried by currents they rarely examine. They are praised for productivity, admired for ambition, rewarded for acquisition, and rarely taught to ask whether any of these can protect the heart from suffering. The world trains us to manage appearances, but not to understand impermanence. It teaches us how to accumulate, but not how to let go. It fills the hands while the inner life remains neglected. So when the Buddha points to the right time to practice, he is not giving abstract philosophy. He is offering mercy. He is saying, do not be fooled by the spell of delay. Do not assume that because conditions are favorable today, they will remain favorable tomorrow. Do not assume that because the teachings are near, you will always feel drawn to them. Do not assume that because your body serves you now, it will always obey. Do not assume that because peace surrounds you now, the world cannot change. Practice while the door is open. Practice while support is available. Practice while the mind can still be guided with relative ease. To hear this deeply is to feel both tenderness and seriousness. Tenderness, because all of us know the temptation to wait. Seriousness, because waiting has consequences. We do not need to hate ourselves for having delayed. We do not need to drown in regret over years already gone. But we do need to see clearly, this very moment, however imperfect, is more workable than the fantasy of some future moment that may never come. And perhaps this is the quiet turning point, not the dramatic vow of becoming someone else overnight, but the humble recognition that the life we've been given is already passing through our hands. The days are not standing still while we decide. The body is already changing. The mind is already being shaped by what it repeatedly loves. The world is already moving. To postpone awakening is not merely to delay a task. It is to let the current carry us further downstream, while telling ourselves we can begin swimming later. The Buddha's realism is so compassionate because it refuses to leave us inside that illusion. It asks us to look directly at what the heart would rather soften or avoid. If favorable times are rare, then they must be used. If the path is open, then it must be walked. If there is still strength, still access, still peace, still guidance, then this is not the hour to sleep through our blessings. And to understand that fully, we must now turn toward the truths human beings most often push out of sight, the great certainties that make delay so perilous: aging, illness, and death. So let us begin with aging not as an abstract idea, not as something that belongs only to the very old, but as a law already quietly at work in every living body. Aging does not suddenly appear on the day the hair turns white or the back begins to bend. It begins much earlier, almost invisibly, while we are still calling ourselves young, still assuming there will be more time, more strength, more chances. The Buddha invites us to look at this clearly, not to become afraid, but to become honest. Because when we are honest about aging, we stop bargaining with time, as though it owes us an extension. Aging is not a punishment. It is not a personal failure. It is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is simply the natural movement of embodied life. Whatever is born changes. Whatever matures declines. Whatever has been gathered eventually disperses. This is true for mountains and rivers, for nations and families, for trees, flowers, and flesh. The body that now feels capable, responsive, and obedient will not remain that way forever. Muscles once quick become slower. Joints once flexible begin to resist. The eyes strain harder to see what once appeared effortlessly clear. The ears miss soft words. Sleep becomes lighter, more fragile. Recovery from fatigue takes longer. A small pain that once would have passed in a day may linger for weeks. Things that used to require no thought at all begin to ask for planning, caution, and rest. To the young, these changes often sound distant, almost theoretical. But anyone who has watched parents age, or has noticed even in themselves how the body does not recover as it did 10 years before, can sense the truth of it. Aging arrives by degrees. It is modest at first. It asks for a little more care, a little more patience. Then gradually it begins to redraw the boundaries of daily life. Climbing stairs is no longer automatic. Carrying groceries becomes an effort. Remembering names requires a pause. Standing up from the floor is not done casually anymore. The body, once treated like a reliable servant, begins to speak with its own authority. And there is something profoundly humbling in that. For much of life, we assume the body will answer us. We tell it to go, and it goes. We tell it to stay awake, and it stays awake. We tell it to work, to carry, to endure, to bounce back, and very often it obeys. This creates a dangerous confidence. We start to imagine not only that the body is strong, but that it is ours in some ultimate sense, fully under our command. Aging slowly reveals the truth. The body was never a possession in the way we imagined. It was always a temporary arrangement, always subject to causes and conditions, always vulnerable to time. This realization is not merely physical. It reaches into identity itself, because many people do not only inhabit their strength, they become it. They become the one who can lift, travel, provide, solve, remember, fix, move quickly, stay independent. Then one day, without drama, some of those abilities begin to thin. The hands are less steady. The memory is less immediate. The balance is less trustworthy. And with these changes can come a quiet, private grief. Not only grief over pain or limitation, but grief over no longer being who one once was. That grief is often invisible to others. A family may notice only that an elder walks more slowly or asks for help more often. But inside the aging heart, there may be a series of small funerals. The loss of driving at night, the loss of reading without glasses, the loss of climbing a ladder, the loss of eating certain foods, the loss of hearing a grandchild's soft voice, the loss of privacy when bathing becomes difficult, the loss of spontaneity when every outing must be measured against fatigue. These are not dramatic tragedies by the world's standards, yet they can pierce deeply. They remind a person again and again that what once felt natural can no longer be assumed. And then there is dependence. For many, this may be one of the hardest parts of aging. To need assistance in areas where one once gave assistance to others can shake the heart. A person who spent decades caring for children may one day need those children to help them dress, organize medication, manage appointments, or simply stand up safely. A person who was once the center of stability in a household may have to wait for others to carry what they can no longer carry. Even when surrounded by love, dependence can bring embarrassment, frustration, and sorrow. It can feel like being slowly separated from one's own familiar life. This is why the Buddha's teaching is so practical when it says that, while one is still young, one should strive. Not because youth is superior in any ultimate sense, and not because old age is without dignity, but because conditions matter. When the body still has endurance, one can sit longer, walk longer, study more steadily, recover more easily from effort. When the memory is still strong, teachings can be learned, reflected upon, and internalized with less strain. When independence is still present, one can arrange one's life around wholesome discipline more effectively. There is a season in which effort is easier, and wisdom tells us not to waste that season. Many people imagine they will practice deeply later. Later, when work settles down. Later, when responsibilities ease. Later, when the children are grown. Later, when there is more silence, more space, more freedom. But later often arrives carrying a different body, a different nervous system, a different set of constraints. The mind may still long for practice, but the knees ache, the back protests, the eyes tire quickly, and the attention is interrupted by pain, medication, or fatigue. The aspiration may remain noble, but the conditions for sustained effort may have become more difficult than expected. This does not mean the elderly cannot practice. They can, and often with great depth. In fact, age can bring a ripeness that youth does not yet possess. The illusions of permanence may already be cracking. The vanity of endless ambition may have softened. The heart may have become more tender, less intoxicated by distraction. An older person may understand loss, fragility, and impermanence not as ideas but as lived truth. Such understanding can become powerful ground for awakening. But still, how much more support there is when the path has been cultivated early, when the mind has been trained before decline intensifies. A practice begun earlier becomes a refuge later. This is one of the great mercies of diligent effort. If mindfulness has been cultivated over years, then when the body weakens, the mind does not meet discomfort as a total stranger. It knows something about staying present. It knows how to observe pain without becoming only pain. It knows how to breathe with fear instead of being swallowed by it. If one has practiced letting go in small ways, then larger losses are not entirely bewildering. If one has reflected on impermanence while still strong, then the changes of old age, however unwelcome, do not feel like cosmic injustice. They feel like the unfolding of a truth one has already begun to understand. This is why spiritual effort is not merely about achieving some distant ideal. It is also a form of preparation, a deep kindness offered to one's future self. Every moment of honest meditation, every act of restraint, every return to awareness, every insight into craving, aversion, and delusion becomes part of an inner shelter. Later, when memory is less sharp and the body less manageable, one may not be able to begin from zero, but one may be able to rest in what has already been planted. The path walked earlier can become the path that carries us when walking is harder. Imagine two people entering old age. Both face loss. Both feel the body changing. Both must release old identities. But one has spent years practicing attention, patience, and wise reflection. The other has spent years in distraction, postponement, and emotional habit. The first person will still suffer. Practice does not cancel aging. But there may be space around the suffering, a steadiness within it, an ability to recognize this too is changing. This too can be known. The second may feel not only the pain of aging, but the additional terror of meeting impermanence unprepared. The difference is not that one escaped reality, and the other did not. The difference is that one learned how to bow to reality before it became impossible to ignore. And this understanding should also make us gentler toward the elderly. When an older person repeats a story, walks slowly, forgets a detail, or needs help with ordinary tasks, it is easy for the impatient mind to reduce them to inconvenience. But if we see clearly, we understand that aging is not merely a collection of symptoms. It is a profound reorganization of a human life. It is the surrender of capacities one did not want to lose. It is the shock of living in a body that no longer follows old instructions. It is often loneliness, because the world moves at the speed of the strong and rarely waits for the weak. To meet old age with compassion is not charity. It is wisdom. It is reverence for a truth that awaits us all. And for those who still feel far from old age, the lesson is not to become gloomy. The lesson is to become sincere. Preparation for aging must begin before aging visibly arrives. We do not wait until the roof is collapsing to learn how to build shelter. We do not wait until the river floods to ask where higher ground is. In the same way, we should not wait until the body is frail, the memory unstable, and dependence unavoidable before turning seriously toward the training of the mind. The wise use youth while youth is present. They use strength while strength remains. They use clarity while clarity is available. To strive in this way is not to reject life. It is to honor it. It is to understand that this precious period of relative ability is not guaranteed and should not be squandered entirely in amusement, resentment, comparison, or delay. Our days of vigor are not permanent property. They are temporary favorable conditions. If we use them only to chase pleasure and defend ego, then when old age comes, we may discover that we spent our best energies feeding what cannot protect us. But if we use even part of that strength to cultivate virtue, concentration, and wisdom, then the years have not been wasted. They have been transformed into support. There is also a deeper beauty in this contemplation. To remember aging is to love more honestly. It softens arrogance. It weakens the fantasy of control. It helps us forgive our own bodies for not being invincible, and it helps us forgive others for slowing down. It reminds us to speak kindly while voices can still be heard, to listen while stories can still be told, to serve those who once served us, and to practice now rather than building altars to intention alone. Aging strips away many illusions, but before it strips them away by force, wisdom asks us to release them willingly. So if you are young, do not think this teaching belongs to someone else. If you are strong, do not imagine strength will negotiate special terms with time. If you are still able to choose your disciplines, shape your days, and direct your energies, then recognize the blessing hidden in that freedom. This is the hour to train the heart. This is the hour to become intimate with impermanence, before it becomes overwhelming. This is the hour to build the inner refuge that no wrinkle, no weakness, trembling hand can take away. For aging does not ask our permission. It continues whether we are ready or not. But readiness changes everything. The one who has practiced may still bend, still tire, still grieve, still depend on others. Yet within that vulnerability there can be dignity, clarity, and peace. There can be less resistance, less bitterness, less panic. There can be a mind that knows how to meet change with understanding instead of war. And if aging is gradual, sickness can come like a storm, collapsing our assumptions in a single moment. There is a story told of a potter named Nanda, who had built his whole identity around his steady hands. He could shape a bowl in the time it took others to prepare their clay. One afternoon, without warning, his right arm went numb at the wrist, and by evening he could no longer hold a tool. The physicians could not say when or if his strength would return. For weeks he sat outside his own workshop, watching younger hands do what his had always done, and he felt as though his very self had been taken from him. It was in that raw, humbled season that he finally listened, really listened, to a teaching he had heard many times before and never understood, that we are not our hands, our trade, or our reputation, but something steadier that can remain even when these are stripped away. A person can wake in the morning with a list of errands, messages to answer, places to go, responsibilities to carry. By evening, find that the whole architecture of ordinary life has been rearranged. A fever rises, a sharp pain appears, a scan reveals what no one expected. A body once trusted without much thought suddenly becomes the center of concern, fear, and uncertainty. In that moment, plans that felt important only hours earlier begin to fade into the background. Deadlines lose their force. Ambitions grow quiet. Even simple things like standing up, taking a full breath, sleeping through the night can become difficult and precious. Illness has a way of reducing life to what is immediate. The mind that used to run in 10 directions is pulled back, again and again, to this aching limb, this trembling weakness, this tightness in the chest, this exhaustion that does not lift. It is not that the world disappears. It is that our access to it changes. The body, which once seemed like a dependable companion, reveals itself as delicate, conditional, and never fully under our command. What we call health is often less solid than we imagined. It is not a permanent possession. It is a temporary balance, a favorable arrangement of causes and conditions that can shift at any time. This is why the Buddha pointed to times of health, times of strength, times of relative ease as precious opportunities for effort. Not because pain makes awakening impossible, but because pain changes the field. It narrows attention. It consumes energy. It can shake confidence. It can make the simplest discipline feel heavy. When the body is burdened, the mind must carry more than it did before. And if the mind has not been trained, it often does not know how. Physical pain is only part of what sickness brings. Very often, suffering multiplies because pain does not remain in the flesh alone. It moves inward and starts touching fear. It touches identity. It touches the stories we tell ourselves about what should be happening and what must never happen. A symptom can become a threat. A diagnosis can become a verdict. Weakness can be felt not only in the muscles but in the heart. One part of the mind says, "This hurts." Another says, "Why is this happening to me?" Another asks, "What if this gets worse?" Another whispers, "I am losing control." And that loss of control is often one of the deepest wounds illness exposes. As long as the body functions well, many people quietly build their confidence upon it. They assume they will be able to go where they wish, think clearly when needed, care for themselves, protect their image, fulfill their duties, and manage the future. Then sickness interrupts that confidence. Suddenly help is needed. Suddenly routines fail. Suddenly one must wait, depend, cancel, surrender, and not know. This can awaken frustration, embarrassment, anger, and it can make even a kind person irritable. It can make even a strong person afraid. That does not mean such reactions are signs of failure. They are deeply human. Illness can strip away the layers by which we usually hold ourselves together. It can reveal how much tension was hidden inside us all along. It can show us attachments we did not know were so strong. Attachment to comfort, attachment to ability, attachment to productivity, attachment to being seen as independent, attachment to tomorrow arriving in the form we expected. Sickness reveals these attachments not to punish us, but to teach us how vulnerable we have always been. And vulnerability, when unexamined, can quickly turn into mental suffering. A person lying in pain may begin to feel abandoned by life. A mind weakened by exhaustion may become confused and suspicious. Long illness can make time itself feel distorted, each day heavy and uncertain. There may be moments when hope feels thin. There may be resentment toward the body, toward circumstances, even toward others who seem healthy and free. There may be the quiet despair of not knowing when relief will come. This is why training the mind cannot be postponed until the hour we need it most. When the house is already burning, it is hard to begin learning how to carry water. Meditation, ethical grounding, and wise reflection are not ornaments for peaceful seasons. They are preparations for instability. They are provisions for difficult weather. When practiced in ordinary days, they become familiar pathways. The heart can still remember when conditions are hard. A person who has spent time observing the breath, noticing sensations without immediate panic, may still feel pain, but perhaps not become entirely overwhelmed by it. A person who has cultivated patience may still be frightened, but less likely to collapse into bitterness. A person grounded in virtue may discover that even when the body is weak, the heart can remain unburdened by regret. This matters more than we often realize. In times of sickness, we may not be able to control the body's condition. We may not be able to command healing, shorten the night, or make discomfort vanish. But some measure of freedom can still remain in how we meet the experience. This freedom is not dramatic. It may be as simple as one conscious breath in the middle of fear. It may be the ability to say, "This is pain, but I do not need to add hatred to it." It may be the strength to notice despair arising without handing over the entire mind to despair. It may be the humility to receive care without hardening in shame. Such capacities do not appear by accident. They are cultivated. They grow from repeated practice when life is still manageable, when the body still serves us reasonably well, when we can sit, walk, reflect, listen, and correct our conduct without the pressure of crisis. This is why days of health should never be mistaken for empty days. They are training days. They are gift days. They are days in which we can build a refuge before the floodwaters rise. Consider how differently illness is met by a trained mind and an untrained one. The trained mind may still tremble, but it knows something about impermanence. It has at least begun to understand that the body is not a fixed self to be commanded. It has practiced returning to the present instead of being dragged endlessly through imagined futures. It has learned, however imperfectly, to soften around discomfort rather than immediately wage war against it. It may still cry. It may still ask for medicine. It may still long for recovery. But beneath these natural responses, there can be a thread of understanding. The untrained mind, by contrast, is often shocked twice. First by the illness itself, and then by its own reaction to illness. It is surprised by fear, surprised by anger, surprised by dependency, surprised by mental agitation, as though suffering were not part of the human design. And because it has not practiced staying with difficult experience, it may rush toward blame, denial, panic, or numbness. It may seek control where none is possible. It may exhaust itself fighting reality before even beginning to care wisely for what is happening. To hear this is not to blame those who suffer. It is to illuminate compassionately why the Buddha urged effort while conditions are favorable. If we wait until the body is weakened, the work becomes steeper. If we wait until the mind is flooded, concentration is harder to gather. If we wait until fear is already shouting, wisdom may be difficult to hear. But if we practice now, even modestly, then when sickness comes, and for most in some form, it will come. We are not meeting it as complete strangers to ourselves. Even small practices matter. The habit of pausing before reacting matters. The habit of speaking truthfully and kindly matters. The habit of reflecting, "This body is subject to illness," matters. The habit of sitting quietly and watching thoughts arise and pass matters. The habit of remembering that all conditions change matters. These may look simple in times of ease, yet in times of affliction, they can become lifelines. What seems ordinary in health becomes extraordinary in suffering. So when you find yourself in a period without heavy illness, do not drift through it as though nothing important is being offered. Do not use well-being only to scatter attention further into distraction. Let health remind you of responsibility, not complacency. Let each untroubled morning say gentle practice while you can. Let each day in which the body obeys more or less as asked become a direct invitation to cultivate the mind. This is not a gloomy message, it is a grateful one. To be able to walk, to sit, to breathe without strain, to read, to listen, to recollect the teachings, to restrain harmful impulses, to nourish kindness, to steady attention. These are blessings, and blessings are best honored by being used well. Gratitude in this sense is not merely saying thank you for another comfortable day. Gratitude is understanding the purpose of the day. Gratitude is recognizing that favorable conditions are not guaranteed, and therefore should not be wasted. Gratitude is turning ability into practice. It is using strength to prepare for weakness, clarity to prepare for confusion, and calm to prepare for upheaval. In this way, even health becomes part of the path, not because it lasts, but because it allows training before it passes. And if illness has already entered one's life, this teaching is still not closed. Even then, moments of practice remain possible. A sickbed can still become a place of honesty. Pain can still reveal the difference between sensation and resistance. Fear can still become an object of knowing rather than a master to obey. But how much gentler this becomes when some foundation has already been laid. How much more accessible wisdom becomes when the heart has been introduced to it before the crisis. Preparation does not erase suffering, but it can transform the way suffering is carried. This is why the time of health, the time of relative ease in the body, is one of the 5 times to strive. Because no one knows how long this condition will hold. Because illness can alter everything quickly. Because when pain arrives, it often brings companions, anxiety, impatience, confusion, sadness, and the aching desire for certainty. Because the mind, if neglected, easily becomes another site of disease. And because the Dharma, practiced sincerely, offers medicine not only for the body's vulnerability, but for the heart's tendency to be shattered by what it cannot control. So while strength remains, train. While the body still carries you, practice. While attention is not yet consumed by pain, learn where true refuge is. Learn to rest the mind in something deeper than comfort. Learn to see change before change forces itself upon you. Learn to loosen the grip of self-centered fear. Learn to inhabit this fragile life with wisdom and tenderness. Then, when sickness comes, as storm or as slow shadow, you may still suffer, but you will not be entirely unprotected. There will be something in you that remembers how to meet what is here. And beyond aging and sickness stands the final truth, the one that gathers every human story, every hope, every loss, into a single shared destination. That truth is death. It is the most universal fact of human life. And yet for most of us, it remains strangely distant in the mind. We know it in theory. We speak of it when others die. We feel it for a moment in hospitals, at funerals, in the quiet shock of hearing that someone healthy yesterday is gone today. But then, almost immediately, the mind turns away. It returns to plans, errands, pleasures, worries, ambitions. It begins again to live as though death belongs to other people, or to some later season that has not yet entered our address. But the Buddha asks us to look more directly. Death is certain. Its timing is not. And in that uneven truth lies one of the deepest reasons to practice now, not later. If death were uncertain, perhaps carelessness would make some sense. If old age, sickness, and dying were only possibilities, perhaps postponement would be harmless. But that is not our condition. We are not moving towards something that may happen. We are moving towards something that will happen. The uncertainty is only this: when and under what circumstances, tonight or decades from now, in sleep or in sickness, with warning or without any announcement at all. To see this clearly is not pessimism, it is honesty, and honesty, in the Buddha's path, is a form of compassion. Because when we stop lying to ourselves about how much time we are guaranteed, life becomes more vivid, more precious, and more morally serious. Heedfulness is not fearfulness. It is intelligence warmed by sincerity. It is the heart awakening to the real conditions of existence and deciding not to squander what is brief. Look at how carefully human beings prepare for lesser things. We prepare for school for years. We prepare for careers with endless effort, training, comparison, and sacrifice. We prepare for weddings, for travel, for retirement, for business opportunities, for the purchase of a house, for the arrival of guests. We insure our property. We organize documents. We save money for emergencies that may never happen. We rehearse conversations that may never occur. We imagine futures that may never arrive. So much energy goes into arranging the furniture of life. And yet the one event that is completely guaranteed is often the one for which we prepare the least. We do not like to say this aloud, because something in us still hopes silence will postpone the truth. But ignoring death has never protected anyone from death. Refusing to think about it has never made it gentler, nor delayed its step, nor negotiated its terms. What avoidance does is something else. It leaves the mind untrained. It leaves the heart easily shocked. It leaves our values confused. It tempts us to spend our days as though they were disposable, as though another chance will always appear to say what matters, mend what is broken, release what is petty, and turn toward what is essential. But no one has been promised that extra season. This is why recollecting death, in the Buddha's teaching, is not meant to darken the spirit. It is meant to purify it. When mortality is remembered wisely, life becomes simpler in the most beautiful way. Many things that looked urgent begin to lose their tyranny. Many things that looked important reveal their smallness. Grudges begin to feel heavy and absurd. Vanity loses some of its charm. The hunger to be admired weakens. The endless need to win every argument starts to seem like a poor use of a vanishing life. When death is near in awareness, not as panic but as truth, distractions become easier to recognize. We begin to ask better questions. If this life is fragile, then how shall I speak today? If my time is uncertain, then what deserves my energy? If I, too, will disappear from all that I cling to, then what kind of heart do I want to cultivate while I am still here? These are not abstract spiritual questions. They enter the kitchen, the office, the family table, the late-night silence of one's own thoughts. They ask whether we are living in a way we would respect if the ending came sooner than expected. They ask whether our habits are leading toward clarity or confusion, toward kindness or hardness, toward freedom or deeper bondage. Many people live as if death is a problem only for the old, but this is not how the world works. Youth does not sign a contract with impermanence. Strength does not purchase immunity. Entire lives have been interrupted in the middle of ordinary afternoons. A journey begins and is never completed. A conversation remains unfinished. A child becomes a memory. A parent is called away. A healthy body collapses. A future carefully imagined dissolves between one breath and the next. This has always been the condition of life, though we often resist admitting it. And precisely because this is so, heedfulness becomes one of the most loving responses to being alive. To live heedfully does not mean to become tense, grim or obsessed. It means we stop borrowing confidence from uncertainty. We stop pretending that delay is wisdom. We stop building our entire lives on the assumption that there will be plenty of time later to become more truthful, more forgiving, more disciplined, more awake. Heedfulness says, do not wait for a dramatic crisis to teach you what is already true. Learn now. Practice now. Clarify now. There is something deeply tender in this. To remember death sincerely is to bow to the vulnerability of all beings. Everyone you love is subject to loss. Everyone you resent is also fragile. Everyone you envy, everyone you compete with, everyone you misunderstand, everyone you pass on the street without noticing. They all carry the same destiny. When this is felt, not merely thought, the heart often becomes gentler. Pride has less room to stand upright. Harshness becomes harder to justify. The mind begins to understand that a life spent in resentment is a tragic misuse of precious time. Even our ambitions can be cleansed by this reflection. It is not that work, beauty, success, or accomplishment become worthless. Rather, they fall into proportion. We see that no possession can follow us beyond death. No reputation can shield us from it. No title can bargain with it. No amount of praise can substitute for inner integrity when the mind must finally face letting go. So then, what does it mean to prepare? In the Buddhist sense, preparing for death is not primarily arranging external matters. Though practical preparation has its place, it is training the mind. It is becoming less intoxicated with what cannot be kept. It is learning little by little how to release. To practice generosity is preparation. To restrain harmful speech is preparation. To examine craving is preparation. To sit quietly and observe the changing nature of body and mind is preparation. To become familiar with impermanence before the final separation arrives is preparation. When we do not practice, death feels like theft. It feels like an outrage against a self that imagined it was meant to remain in control. But when we practice sincerely, something begins to change. We still love, we still grieve, we still feel the poignancy of endings. Buddhism does not ask us to become cold. It asks us to become wise within tenderness. It asks us to know that every embrace is temporary, every role unstable, every body vulnerable, every experience passing. From that knowing can come a deeper gratitude, not a lesser one. Diligent practice, then, is not merely an effort to become better while life is pleasant. It is the art of becoming inwardly ready for the unavoidable. Ready does not mean perfectly fearless. Ready does not mean emotionally untouched. It means that when death approaches, whether gradually or suddenly, the mind is less wild. There is less panic because there has been some training in impermanence. There is less regret because one has not entirely postponed what matters. There is less clinging because one has practiced letting go in small ways for many years. Imagine two minds meeting the same ending. One has spent a lifetime feeding distraction, denial, and attachment, rarely turning toward truth unless forced. The other has spent years, however imperfectly, learning to pause, to reflect, to release, to return to what is wholesome and real. Both may tremble, both may feel sadness, but they do not meet death with the same inner resources. One is a stranger to surrender. The other, though still human and vulnerable, has at least rehearsed the gesture of opening the hand. This is why the wise do not wait until the final illness to begin. At that point, the body may be weak, the mind may be clouded, fear may be strong, and old habits may rush in with great force. What we have practiced repeatedly becomes our refuge under pressure. If all our life we have trained in distraction, then distraction will likely dominate us. If all our life we have trained in greed, resentment, and self-deception, those tendencies will not politely step aside at the end. But if we have cultivated mindfulness, ethical restraint, faith, calm, and insight, then these too can arise when most needed. To remember death is also to ask, what would I not want to carry to the end? Some burdens become unbearable under this light. Petty rivalries, long-nursed bitterness, the compulsive need to appear superior, the exhausting project of maintaining false images. How many hours of a human life are lost trying to protect pride? How many relationships are damaged because no one wishes to bow first? How many days are wasted chasing stimulation while the soul quietly starves? Mortality can cut through this fog. It can return us to essentials. A clean conscience matters, a heart capable of forgiveness matters, a mind that can remain steady in change matters, wisdom matters, compassion matters. The ability to meet gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain with some balance of mind, this matters profoundly. These are not decorative virtues. They become shelter. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful transformations in this contemplation. We begin to want a noble life more than a merely decorated one. Not necessarily a famous life, not a life that impresses others, but a life with substance. A life that, if ended suddenly, would still have been oriented toward what is true. A life in which one has tried, however humbly, to reduce harm, deepen understanding, and free the heart from unnecessary bondage. The recollection of death can also make us more present. Strange as it sounds, when we stop assuming endless tomorrows, this very moment gains warmth. The sound of rain becomes more intimate, a parent's voice more precious, a child's laughter less ordinary, a shared meal less automatic. Even one quiet breath taken with awareness feels meaningful. Impermanence does not only take value away, it creates value. Because things do not last, they matter. So the Buddha's reminder is not meant to cast a shadow over life, but to remove the intoxication that keeps us half asleep within it. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. Therefore, a wise person does not drift. A wise person practices, not in panic but in clarity, not in despair but in reverence for the rarity of this human birth and the uncertainty of its duration. And the more deeply this enters the heart, the more naturally effort becomes sincere. We no longer practice only when convenient. We no longer wait for ideal conditions. We understand that every day neglected is a day that does not return. Every wholesome act matters. Every moment of mindfulness matters. Every time we choose truth over self-deception, patience over anger, generosity over grasping, recollection over heedlessness, we are shaping the mind that will one day meet the final letting go. If mortality clarifies the need for effort, we must then ask what striving truly means in the Buddha's path. This question matters because many people hear the word effort and immediately tightened inside. They imagine force, they imagine pressure, they imagine a grim spiritual athlete trying to conquer the mind through sheer will. But that is not the fragrance of the Dhamma. That is not the energy that leads to peace. In the Buddha's teaching, right effort is not violence against oneself. It is not the inner voice that says, "You are still not pure enough, not calm enough, not disciplined enough." It is not the restless desire to become impressive, advanced, or spiritually special. It is not the anxious performance of holiness. True effort is much quieter than that, and much more honest. It is the steady willingness to protect what is wholesome, to nourish what is wholesome, to notice what is unwholesome, and to let the unwholesome fade through wisdom, restraint, and repeated care. Right effort begins with understanding the landscape of the mind. Within us there are seeds of kindness and seeds of cruelty, seeds of patience and seeds of irritation, seeds of clarity and seeds of delusion. Practice does not mean pretending the dark seeds are not there. It means learning not to water them. It means noticing when anger begins to rise and refusing to feed it with stories. It means noticing jealousy before it becomes speech. It means noticing craving before it turns into grasping. At the same time, it means giving attention to the brighter qualities that are often neglected. Gratitude, sincerity, mindfulness, compassion, contentment. These too are present, but they grow only when remembered. So striving, in its deepest sense, is cultivation. A farmer does not scream at the field. A gardener does not hate the soil because weeds appear. They work steadily. They remove what harms. They support what nourishes. They return day after day because they understand that growth follows causes. In the same way, the practitioner learns to relate to the mind not as an enemy to be crushed, but as a field to be tended. There is diligence, yes. There is vigilance, yes. But there is also patience, because the mind has been shaped by habit for a very long time. This is why right effort must be balanced by gentleness. Without discipline, practice becomes vague and sentimental. We tell ourselves we are accepting everything, but in truth, we are simply drifting with old habits. Without gentleness, however, discipline hardens into self-hatred. Then every mistake becomes evidence of failure. Every wandering thought becomes a reason for shame. Every weakness becomes something to hide from ourselves. This does not liberate the heart. It only adds another layer of suffering. The Buddha's path asks for another way. But do not attack yourself. Be honest, but do not be cruel. See your greed clearly, but do not become greedy for purity. See your anger clearly, but do not turn that anger against your own heart. See your confusion clearly, but do not build an identity out of being confused. Right effort is not the wish to become another person. It is the willingness to train this mind, this heart, this life, exactly where it is, with steadiness and compassion. A person may sit down to meditate and discover not serenity but noise, restlessness, regret, planning, old memories, irritation, sleepiness. If effort is misunderstood, the person begins fighting all of it. They tense the body. They demand silence. They become frustrated that the mind is not obeying. But frustration is itself another disturbance. Pressure becomes another form of craving. The wish to force calm actually pushes calm farther away. Wise effort does something different. It notices what is present without collapsing into it. It gently returns to the breath, or to the body, or to loving awareness again and again. Not with boredom, not with resentment, but with the simple understanding that returning is the practice. The same principle applies far beyond formal meditation. Right effort is not something reserved for a cushion, a monastery, or a sacred hour of the day. It lives in ordinary choices, and that is where its truth becomes visible. It appears in speech, when we feel the impulse to say something sharp, clever, or harmful, and instead choose what is timely and kind. It appears when gossip begins around us, and we refrain from joining the pleasure of tearing someone absent to pieces. It appears when we are tempted to exaggerate, to manipulate, to defend our image, and we pause long enough to remember that truthfulness purifies the heart. It also appears in consumption, which today shapes the mind more than many people realize. What do we feed the eyes, the ears, the imagination? What kind of music, images, conversations, and information enter consciousness all day long? A mind endlessly fed with agitation does not easily settle. A heart constantly stimulated by envy, outrage, sensuality, fear, and comparison becomes tired and reactive. Right effort includes guarding the sense doors, not in a frightened way, but in an intelligent one. We begin to ask, does this lead to clarity or confusion, to compassion or agitation, to freedom or addiction? In this way, even choosing what to watch, what to read, what to scroll through becomes part of the path. Attention itself is also a field of effort. Where does the mind go when it is untrained? Usually toward worry, fantasy, resentment, replay, anticipation, self-concern. Not because we are bad, but because habit runs deeply. Right effort means not abandoning the mind to whatever captures it. It means remembering, many times in one day, to come back to the body standing, walking, breathing, back to the tone of the heart, back to what we are doing while we are doing it. Washing dishes can become part of effort. Driving can become part of effort. Waiting in line can become part of effort. The ordinary moment, instead of being dismissed as spiritually empty, becomes the very place where training ripens. And then there are reactions. This is where many of us discover how much work remains. Someone criticizes us, and defensiveness flares up before thought has even formed. Someone calls us, and hurt turns quickly into coldness. Something pleasant appears, and craving rushes forward to claim it. Something unpleasant appears, and resistance hardens around it. Right effort does not mean suppressing every feeling until we become numb. It means learning to meet reactions before they become actions, before they become speech, before they shape karma. A flash of anger is one thing. Building a house for anger inside the mind is another. Disappointment is one thing. Feeding it until it becomes bitterness is another. Effort is the sacred pause in which wisdom can enter. Restraint in this sense is not punishment. It is protection. When a person refrains from speaking in anger, from indulging a destructive desire, from acting on a harmful impulse, they are not losing freedom. They are guarding freedom. They are refusing slavery to momentary moods. In the beginning, restraint can feel uncomfortable because the old habits do not get what they want. But slowly a deeper joy becomes possible. The joy of not causing harm, the joy of simplicity, the joy of self-respect, the joy of discovering that one does not have to obey every impulse that arises. Generosity too is a form of right effort because it weakens the reflex of clinging. To give time, attention, forgiveness, material support, patient listening, or even a gentle smile when the heart would prefer to close itself off. This is training. It is not always dramatic. Often it is hidden and quiet. Yet every act of giving loosens the fist around self. Every sincere offering reminds the mind that happiness does not grow only by acquiring. Sometimes it grows by releasing. This is important because many people think effort means only stopping bad things. But the path is not merely defensive. It is also creative. We actively generate the beautiful states that support awakening. We cultivate loving kindness when the heart is dry. We cultivate compassion when another person's suffering would be easier to ignore. We cultivate sympathetic joy when jealousy would be more habitual. We cultivate equanimity when life does not obey our preferences. We recollect generosity, recollect the Buddha, recollect the Dhamma, recollect the Sangha, not as ritual performance, but as nourishment. These are ways of inclining the mind toward freedom. And still, there will be days when the practice feels weak, days of laziness, days of discouragement, days when the teachings feel distant and old tendencies feel near. On such days, right effort does not demand perfection. It asks for non-abandonment. Maybe the meditation is short. Maybe mindfulness is broken again and again. Maybe the heart is heavy. Still, one remembers, one restrains one harsh sentence, one takes one conscious breath, one refrains from one unwholesome act. One begins again at the nearest point possible. This too is noble effort. In fact, some of the purest effort appears not when practice feels inspiring, but when one continues without inspiration. There is great humility in this. The practitioner learns that purification is gradual. We are not manufacturing enlightenment like a product on a schedule. We are living into it by causes and conditions. Each moment of mindfulness weakens heedlessness. Each moment of patience weakens aggression. Each moment of renunciation weakens bondage. Each moment of wise reflection weakens delusion. The changes may be subtle at first, almost invisible, but the mind is being shaped. The heart becomes less impulsive, less intoxicated, less entangled. Space appears where once there was only reactivity. Light appears where once there was confusion. This is how liberation becomes real, not as a distant, abstract ideal admired from afar, but as a direction lived now. Every wholesome effort bends the heart toward release. Every refusal to feed greed, hatred, and delusion makes the chain slightly thinner. Every ordinary act done with care becomes part of the long purification of consciousness. Over time, the practitioner begins to trust this process. Peace is not produced by force. It is uncovered through repeated alignment with truth. And perhaps that is the deepest reassurance in right effort. We do not need to become heroic in the worldly sense. We do not need to perform some dramatic image of sainthood. We need to keep tending the mind. We need to keep remembering what leads to suffering and what leads out of it. We need to keep choosing, in 1,000 small moments, the path that cleans the heart rather than clouds it. This is effort as love, effort as protection, effort as respect for the possibility of awakening within an ordinary human life. So when we hear the call to strive, we should not hear a command to harden. We should hear an invitation to care deeply and consistently for the direction of the mind, to be awake in speech, awake in consumption, awake in attention, awake in reaction, awake in restraint, awake in generosity, awake in remembrance. In this way, effort becomes not a burden added to life, but a way of inhabiting life more wisely. And once this principle is understood, the teaching no longer remains only at the level of doctrine. It begins to enter the fabric of the day, the familiar movements, the unnoticed decisions, the hidden habits through which a life is actually lived. That is where the teaching becomes beautifully practical. It stops sounding like something reserved for monasteries, forests, or rare moments of perfect silence, and begins to reveal itself inside the ordinary architecture of a day. The Buddha's way does not ask us to wait until life becomes uncomplicated. It asks us to use the life we already have, this very mind, this very body, these very hours, as the ground of cultivation. A person may still have work to do, a family to care for, bills to pay, responsibilities that do not disappear. And yet even within such a life, practice can breathe, can take shape, can deepen. Not through grand gestures alone, but through repeated, sincere turning of the heart. A day of practice often begins before any visible action. It begins in the first moments of waking, before the phone is reached for, before old worries rush back in, Before the mind is carried away by unfinished conversations and imagined futures, there is a chance to remember. Just a moment, a quiet inward recollection. I am alive today. This life is uncertain. This day will pass. May I use it well. May my body, speech and mind move in a wholesome direction. Such recollection may seem small, almost too simple to matter, but it sets the tone of the inner climate. It reminds us that we are not waking merely to repeat habit. We are waking into an opportunity. Some people begin the day by bowing, by lighting incense, by chanting a short passage, by taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Others sit quietly for 10 minutes, feeling the breath, steadying attention before the world enters. Others recite the precepts to themselves, not as rigid rules but as a form of protection. Today, let me do no harm. Let me be truthful. Let me guard the senses. Let me not be intoxicated by anger, greed, or heedlessness. These acts may be brief, but they gather the scattered mind. They place the heart in relationship with something higher than impulse. From there, the practice moves with us into the household itself. The morning may be busy. There may be children to prepare, meals to make, elders to help, traffic to stay. Yet, even here, the teaching can live. We can notice the difference between rushing and agitation. We can move quickly without inward violence. We can speak in a way that does not wound. We can refrain from starting the day with complaint. We can wash, dress, clean, and prepare food with a little more care, a little more presence, understanding that mindfulness does not belong only to a meditation cushion. It belongs in the kitchen, at the sink, in the doorway, in the car, at the bus stop, in the elevator, wherever mind and body meet experience. Very often, speech is where the quality of practice becomes visible. Many people imagine spiritual effort in terms of meditation alone, but some of the deepest work takes place in ordinary conversation. A day can be lost through careless words. A day can also be sanctified by restraint. Before speaking, there can be a pause, even if only the length of one breath. Is this true? Is it beneficial? Is it the right time? Can it be said kindly? This small gatekeeper at the mouth protects an enormous amount of suffering. It prevents resentment from multiplying. It softens conflict before it hardens into injury. It trains us to value clarity over reaction, gentleness over impulse, sincerity over performance. To guard speech also means resisting the subtle pleasures of gossip, sarcasm, and self-importance. The mind often wants stimulation, and words become one of its easiest toys. We exaggerate, we dramatize, we hint, we judge, we repeat what does not need repeating. But every indulgence leaves a trace. It disturbs trust. It coarsens the heart. So practice in daily life includes learning the dignity of fewer words, cleaner words, words that carry less poison. A householder who speaks honestly and harmlessly is already walking a noble path in the middle of worldly life. Then there is work, and work is one of the great proving grounds of the Dhamma. Whatever one's occupation may be, the question is not only how to succeed, but how to remain upright while doing it. Honest livelihood matters because the mind is shaped by what it repeatedly agrees to. If one deceives others for gain, manipulates, exploits, or feeds on harm, inner conflict grows even if outer prosperity appears. But if one works with integrity, if one earns in ways that do not violate conscience, then labor itself becomes part of practice. Effort at work can become training in patience, responsibility, steadiness, and humility. Even in demanding environments, one can cultivate small forms of mindfulness. Before opening the computer, one breath. Before answering a difficult message, one breath. Before entering a meeting, one breath. Not to become passive, but to become collected. The world rewards speed, but the Dhamma teaches us the value of non-confused attention. A person who pauses for a few seconds many times a day may protect the mind more effectively than someone who waits for rare ideal conditions. These little recollections interrupt momentum. They prevent us from being swept away by irritation, comparison, fear, and pride. When stress rises, practice may look very humble, relaxing the jaw, feeling the feet on the ground, noticing that anger is present without immediately obeying it, recognizing that anxiety is surging without turning it into identity, returning to the body, returning to breathing, returning to the fact that this moment too can be known. Such moments are not failures of practice. They are the very places where practice becomes real. If mindfulness only appears when conditions are pleasant, then it has not yet matured. But if it can be remembered in tension, confusion, and emotional heat, then it begins to protect the heart. For those living in family life, the path also unfolds through care. Washing dishes can be practice. Listening fully to a loved one can be practice. Earning honestly for one's household can be practice. Refraining from bringing home the toxins of the world and spilling them onto those nearby can be practice. Apologizing when one has spoken harshly can be practice. Teaching children gratitude, generosity, and truthfulness can be practice. The ordinary duties of relationship are not separate from the path when they are held with mindfulness and virtue. In many cases, they are exactly where selfishness is exposed and compassion is trained. This is why simplicity is so powerful. A complicated life disperses energy, endless entertainment, endless consumption, endless distraction, endless comparison. These wear grooves in the mind. We begin to lose taste for silence, lose patience for depth, lose the strength to stay with anything difficult or subtle. So part of daily practice is not only adding wholesome habits, but reducing what scatters the heart, to consume less noise, to be more careful with media, to notice what enters through the eyes and ears, to choose nourishment over agitation. When the senses are constantly flooded, concentration weakens and discernment grows dim. But when life is simplified even a little, the mind has a chance to collect itself again. Devotional practices can help here in a quiet but profound way. Bowing, chanting, offering flowers, placing the image of the Buddha in a clean space, recollecting the qualities of awakening. These actions soften the hardness of self-centered living. They remind us that the path is not merely self-improvement. It is reverence for truth. It is willingness to be guided by wisdom greater than our moods. For some, devotion steadies faith when meditation feels dry. For others, it cleanses pride. It teaches the heart to kneel inwardly, to become teachable, to remember gratitude. And gratitude itself is a form of wealth that protects the mind from constant dissatisfaction. Study also has its place in an ordinary day. Even a few paragraphs of Dhamma read with care can redirect the mind. One teaching remembered at the right moment can prevent an entire chain of suffering. Study gives language to what we are living through. It clarifies right view. It reminds us what matters. Without contact with the teachings, practice can slowly drift into vagueness or mere self-soothing. But when reflection is nourished by wise words, energy is renewed. We remember why restraint, why mindfulness matters, why impermanence matters, why we should not trust every craving that passes through the mind. And then, of course, there is meditation proper, whether brief or extended. Not everyone can sit for an hour each day. Not everyone has ideal conditions. But many can sit for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes with sincerity. The important thing is continuity. To sit not only when inspired, but regularly. To let the mind learn familiarity with stillness. To observe how restless it is, how grasping it is, how easily it wanders, and not be discouraged by this. Seeing the mind clearly is not a sign that practice is failing. It is part of the awakening of honesty. Little by little, through repeated returning, the mind learns another rhythm. It becomes less intoxicated by every thought, less eager to chase every mood, more able to remain. Some days will feel bright and collected, others will feel dry, noisy, and difficult. But daily practice teaches something precious, the value of showing up without bargaining, not asking, "Do I feel spiritual today?" but understanding, This heart needs training every day. Just as the body is maintained through repeated care, so the mind is shaped through repeated cultivation. Occasional bursts of enthusiasm may feel dramatic, but they often fade. A small, steady flame gives more light over time than a fire that flares and disappears. This continuity is one of the hidden miracles of the path. 5 mindful breaths each morning kept faithfully can change a life. One sincere precept guarded carefully can purify countless interactions. 10 minutes of evening reflection, maintained over years, can deepen wisdom more than a dozen emotional resolutions that are quickly abandoned. Practice transforms us not only through intensity, but through rhythm, through returning, through beginning again, through refusing to let forgetfulness become our master. At the end of the day, the path becomes reflective. Before sleep, there can be another pause. How was this day lived? Where did I act with kindness? Where did I speak carelessly? What stirred greed, anger, or delusion? What protected the mind? What weakened it? This is not meant to become self-punishment. It is a form of clear seeing infused with compassion. If there was goodness, we rejoice in it. If there was harm, we acknowledge it honestly and form the intention to do better. In this way, each day becomes a teacher. Nothing is wasted. Even mistakes become material for wisdom when met without denial. Some may end the day by dedicating merit, offering whatever goodness was done for the welfare of all beings. Some may chant softly. Some may sit again in silence. Some may simply lie down with mindfulness, remembering impermanence and letting the mind rest in non-harming. To fall asleep with a cleaner heart is no small blessing. It means the day has not merely been spent, it has been used. When such a rhythm is sustained, practice stops being an isolated activity and becomes a way of living. Waking, speaking, working, consuming, relating, reflecting. Each becomes part of one continuous field of cultivation. Ethical conduct supports peace of mind. Simplicity supports mindfulness. Devotion supports humility. Study supports right understanding. Meditation supports stability. Reflection supports growth. None of these stand alone. They nourish one another, protect one another, and together they help keep the heart from being dragged in every direction by the world. This is how favorable conditions are honored. Not by admiring them from a distance, but by using them. Youth, health, sufficient livelihood, peaceful circumstances, access to the teachings. These become meaningful when translated into habit, into remembrance, into discipline softened by sincerity. Even a very ordinary person, living a very ordinary life, can walk a profound path in this way. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but faithfully. And yet practice does not unfold in isolation, because human beings are shaped by those they listen to, trust, and live among. There is a memory kept by an old nun named Dira, who often said that she owed her practice less to her own discipline than to a single friend she made in her first year in robes. That friend never lectured her. She simply sat beside her each evening, mended her own robes in silence, and asked without judgment how the day's meditation had gone. Dira admitted that on the nights she wanted to give up entirely, it was not a teaching that kept her seated, but the quiet knowledge that her friend would ask about it in the morning. Years later, when that friend had passed away, Dira became that same steady presence for younger nuns, saying that this was the only way she knew to repay a debt that could never be measured in words. A person may begin with sincere intention, may even understand what is wholesome and what is harmful, but when the mind becomes tired, discouraged, or uncertain, it often borrows its direction from the company it keeps. This is why noble friendship matters so deeply on the path. A good spiritual friend does not simply make us feel comforted. More importantly, such a person helps us remember what we truly value when we are close to forgetting it. They steady the heart when enthusiasm fades. They remind us to be honest when self-deception appears. They help turn us back toward what is clear, simple, and freeing. There are days when practice feels bright and effort comes naturally. But there are also days when the mind is dull, restless, wounded, or proud. On such days, one kind word from someone walking the path can prevent a long fall. A wise friend may say very little, yet their presence alone can become a teaching. Their patience exposes our haste. Their humility softens our vanity. Their restraint reveals how noisy our desires have become. Without needing to condemn us, they help us see ourselves more truthfully. This is not always comfortable. Noble friendship is not flattery. It is not the kind of companionship that agrees with every impulse just to preserve closeness. A true friend in the Dhamma cares for liberation more than approval. They encourage conscience, not indulgence. They support sincerity, not performance. They do not feed our excuses when we are drifting into negligence. They help us distinguish between being gentle with ourselves and simply being lazy in disguise. In this way, spiritual friendship becomes a protection. Conscience is a delicate thing. If we surround ourselves with people who mock discipline, belittle ethical care, or celebrate distraction, that inner voice becomes easier to ignore. Little by little, what once felt clearly unwholesome starts to seem normal. Harsh speech appears entertaining. Greed begins to look like ambition. Vanity is renamed confidence. Restlessness is mistaken for freedom. In such an atmosphere, the heart loses its sensitivity. We may not even notice the decline at first, because the surrounding culture keeps reassuring us that nothing is wrong. But a community grounded in the path creates a different atmosphere altogether. In that kind of field, the heart begins to remember its deeper longing. Listening matters there. Reverence matters there. Restraint is not treated as weakness but as strength. Service is not seen as lowly but as beautiful. Silence is not feared. Humility is not humiliating. People do not need to prove themselves at every moment. They can learn. They can admit confusion. They can ask for guidance without shame. This is a rare blessing. When a person enters such a community, something subtle begins to change. They become more careful with speech. Because they sense the value of harmony, they become more attentive to intention, because they see how even small actions affect others. They become less intoxicated with their own opinions, because they are surrounded by people who are also trying to listen deeply and let go. In this way, the company of the wise does not merely influence behavior from the outside. It gradually reshapes the inner climate of the mind. This is why favorable conditions are not only about youth, health, livelihood, or peace in the land. They are also relational. Who speaks into our life? Who do we admire? Who do we imitate without realizing it? What kind of conversation surrounds our days? What values are quietly being normalized in our home, our friendships, our religious life, our social world? These influences enter the heart like water entering soil. Over time, they determine what grows there. If one lives among those who inflame greed, the heart is trained to hunger. If one lives among those who inflame competition and ego, the heart is trained to compare, defend, and display itself. If one lives among those who delight in gossip, resentment, and fault-finding, the heart begins to feed on coarseness. Even if one still speaks of spiritual things, the current underneath is moving in another direction. Practice then becomes shallow, unstable, and divided against itself. How different it is when one lives among those who encourage restraint. Restraint, in the deepest sense, is not repression. It is the wisdom of not obeying every impulse. It is the dignity of a mind that does not rush to consume whatever it wants. In wholesome community, this restraint is supported and honored. People understand that saying no to heedlessness is an act of love. They know that guarding the senses, speaking carefully, living simply, and being mindful with desires are not signs of deprivation. They are signs that one cares for the freedom of the heart. The same is true of service. In communities ruled by ego, service is often used as a strategy for praise, influence, or control. Even generosity becomes entangled with self-image. But in a healthy spiritual community, service can become a direct training in letting go. Sweeping a floor, preparing a space, offering food, caring for the sick, listening with patience, helping without needing recognition. These ordinary acts begin to cleanse the mind. They weaken the habit of placing oneself at the center of every story. They teach tenderness, steadiness, and gratitude. And then there is listening. Genuine listening is one of the great medicines of the path. In worldly circles, people often listen only long enough to reply, to debate, or to return attention to themselves. But in a community shaped by Dhamma, listening becomes a form of humility. One listens not merely to gather information, but to receive correction, to understand suffering, to hear truth that may challenge one's preferences. To listen in this way is already to soften the ego. It is already to practice. Reverence, too, has a place here. Modern minds sometimes resist this word, fearing that reverence means blind submission or loss of independence. But healthy reverence is not servility. It is the capacity to recognize what is higher, wiser, and more noble than our current state of mind. It is the willingness to bow inwardly before truth. Without reverence, the heart quickly becomes casual, opinionated, and spiritually arrogant. With reverence, learning stays alive. Gratitude stays alive. The path remains luminous rather than merely intellectual. This becomes especially important for those who are still learning how to practice properly. Many people are sincere but confused. They want peace, but do not yet know how to cultivate it. They want freedom, but still carry many mistaken ideas about what freedom is. They may mistake intensity for wisdom, or emotional uplift for insight, or outer identity for inner transformation. Left entirely to themselves, they can wander for a long time inside their own assumptions. This is one reason the Sangha is so precious. The Sangha, in its noble sense, is not merely an institution or a label. It is the living presence of those who preserve, embody, and transmit the path. Through the Sangha, the teaching is not left as an abstract memory from the distant past. It is carried by human beings who study it, practice it, protect it, and offer it onward. They become bridges between the awakened wisdom of the Buddha and the ordinary struggles of people still trying to understand their own minds. For this reason, the Sangha deserves deep respect, not because every individual is perfect, but because the role itself is sacred. When monastics and sincere practitioners live in harmony, discipline, and purity of intention, they safeguard something immeasurably valuable for the world. They keep the lamp of Dhamma from going out. They make it possible for future generations to hear what leads beyond suffering. Without those who dedicate themselves to preserving the teaching, many would never even know where to begin. There is a beautiful tenderness in this. The Buddha does not stand before us in bodily form now, speaking directly into our confusion, and yet the guidance has not vanished. It continues through those who receive it faithfully and live it carefully. A noble teacher may correct us, encourage us, or quietly model the path without grand display. A community of practitioners may demonstrate through ordinary conduct what compassion, mindfulness, and restraint actually look like in daily life. In this way, the Dhamma remains visible. How many people first learn patience because they have seen someone patient? How many discover humility because they encounter a person who has no need to boast? How many begin to trust ethical living because they have watched another person carry integrity through difficulty? Example teaches in a way that concepts alone cannot. This is why the Sangha is not secondary to practice. It is often the very environment in which practice becomes real. When the community is harmonious and pure, it benefits even those who are not yet strong. A beginner who lacks stability can borrow stability from the structure of the community. A confused person can borrow clarity from its teachings and rhythms. Someone prone to laziness can be strengthened by the good habits of those around them. Someone inclined toward pride can be softened by the quiet dignity of others who do not compete for spiritual importance. This is a form of grace, though it still requires effort. We are helped by the field in which we practice, and when that field is damaged, the consequences are serious. If spiritual community becomes corrupted by power, vanity, division, or carelessness, many hearts are harmed. Faith weakens. Beginners become disillusioned. The teaching is distorted. That is why harmony within the Sangha is not a small matter. It is one of the conditions that allows the Dhamma to remain accessible in the world. A peaceful land is a blessing. Health is a blessing. Sufficient means are a blessing. But a community that truly protects the path is also a blessing beyond measure. So we should learn to value environments that protect the heart. Not every place is neutral. Not every friendship is harmless. Not every gathering nourishes wisdom. Some places may entertain us while quietly scattering the mind. Some relationships may affirm us while strengthening our delusions. Some communities may appear spiritual while feeding comparison and attachment. To be discerning about where we place our trust is not judgmental. It is part of right care. If we find wise companions, we should cherish them. If we find trustworthy teachings, we should not take them lightly. If we find a community where sincerity matters more than image, where discipline is joined with kindness, where service is natural and reverence is alive, then we should recognize how fortunate we are. Such conditions do not arise everywhere, and they do not last forever without care. They must be honored, protected, and participated in, because in the end, practice is both personal and shared. Each person must walk, observe, restrain, and awaken for themselves. No one can purify another's mind by force. And yet, almost no one reaches maturity without help, without examples, without correction, without the shelter of those who have gone before. We rise together more than we realize. We lose our way together more than we admit. To understand this is to become both more humble and more grateful. So when speaking of the times to strive, we should remember that one of the greatest supports for diligence is not found only in our own determination, but in the noble company that keeps determination alive. A wholesome community does not replace effort. It protects it. It encourages it. It reminds the weary heart why effort matters. It carries the living voice of the path into times when our own clarity falters, and when such friendship, such guidance, such communal purity appear in this life, they should be received as precious conditions indeed. For from there, we begin to see with sober wonder just how rare it is for so many blessings to converge at once. To begin to understand these 5 times deeply is to realize that they are not ordinary conveniences. They are not small advantages, not minor comforts, not background details of a human life. They are conditions of immense spiritual consequence. When youth is present, when strength remains, when the body is not burdened by constant illness, when food and shelter do not consume every waking hour, when society is not collapsing into violence, and when true teachings are still alive through noble practitioners and sincere communities, something extraordinary is taking place. A door is open. A rare alignment has appeared. Most beings do not live under such conditions. This is not said to create fear, nor to flatter human life with sweet and exaggerated praise. It is said so that the heart may become honest. Look carefully at the world. Countless beings live with no safety at all. Their days are shaped by hunger, danger, displacement, exploitation, war, grief, and fear. Some live in places where the simplest calm cannot be sustained long enough for reflection. Some are born into confusion so deep that wisdom never comes near them in any recognizable form. Some have intelligence, but no guidance. Some have guidance, but no health. Some have no health. Some have leisure, but are swallowed by distraction. Some hear of truth, but only faintly, as if from a great distance. and never close enough to practice it. Some long for inner peace but are trapped inside circumstances so harsh that survival itself devours the day. And even among human beings, how rare it is for favorable conditions to gather together. A person may be young, yet reckless, and without any contact with the Dharma. Another may know the teachings, but only after years of illness or exhaustion have weakened the body. Another may live in comfort, but in an environment where false views are praised and discipline is mocked. Another may have access to spiritual teachings, but live amid social unrest, family crisis, economic burden, or mental agitation so severe that the mind never settles enough to enter the path deeply. Another may sincerely wish to practice, yet never meet trustworthy teachers, never find a good spiritual friend, never encounter a community where the teaching is preserved with integrity. So when these blessings converge, even imperfectly, it is astonishing. To be alive as a human being is already no small matter, but to be alive with some clarity of mind, some moral sensitivity, some capacity to listen, some measure of health, some degree of external stability, and some access to authentic guidance. This is a rare meeting of causes that should stop us in our tracks, not because we are superior to anyone, not because fortune makes us special, but because the opportunity is fragile, improbable, and deeply consequential. Many people move through life without ever pausing to recognize this. They notice what is missing, what is delayed, what is unpleasant, what has not yet been fixed. The mind is quick to complain. It sees the ache in the knee, but not the legs that still walk. It sees the pressure of work, but not the hours still available for recollection and restraint. It sees the imperfections of a spiritual community, but not the miracle that the teachings still survive there at all. It sees that life is not ideal, and from that truth concludes that the time to practice has not yet come. But the path has never depended on ideal conditions. It depends on sufficient conditions, and sufficient conditions are already rare. This is a very important shift of vision. If we wait for life to become perfectly arranged before practicing sincerely, practice may never begin. There will always be some inconvenience, some uncertainty, some unfinished business, some emotional weather passing through. Yet, amid all this, so much may already be present. We may still be breathing freely. We may still be a sit, bow, walk, read, restrain ourselves, confess our faults, cultivate kindness, guard the senses, and remember impermanence. We may still have enough food for today, enough safety for tonight, enough contact with the teaching to distinguish wholesome from unwholesome. We may still have the chance to turn the heart. That is not a small thing. That is a tremendous thing. When this is not understood, blessings become invisible. Invisible blessings are wasted blessings. A person can live surrounded by supports for awakening and still act as though deprived. Another person with fewer supports may treasure every moment and make great progress. The difference is not only in what one has, it is in whether one recognizes what one has while it is still here. For youth fades, health shifts, peace is unstable, communities fracture, teachers pass away, memory weakens, energy drains. The world changes without consulting our preferences. Conditions that seem secure today may vanish tomorrow. To say this is not pessimism. It is sobriety. It is seeing life according to its nature. Everything conditioned is uncertain. Therefore, anything supportive of the path must be understood as both precious and temporary. And because it is temporary, gratitude must become more than a feeling. There is a kind of gratitude that remains soft and passive. It says, "How fortunate this is," and then goes back to sleep. It admires the beauty of the opportunity without entering it. It feels warmed by blessing but does not answer blessing with action. This is not yet mature gratitude. Mature gratitude becomes responsibility. It asks, "Since this rare chance has appeared, how shall I care for it? How shall I use it well? How shall I avoid wasting what so many beings do not have?" That question changes everything. Once gratitude ripens into responsibility, the mind no longer relates to favorable conditions as possessions for comfort alone. It begins to see them as entrusted resources. Youth is not merely for indulgence. Strength is not merely for chasing restlessness. Health is not merely for extending distraction. Material sufficiency is not merely for decorating identity. Peace in society is not merely for greater consumption. Access to true teaching is not merely for admiration, quotation, or cultural belonging. These are supports for liberation. They are conditions through which greed, hatred, and delusion may be weakened. They are the field in which wisdom may be planted and cultivated. Then complaint starts to lose some of its authority. This does not mean one must deny pain, ignore injustice, or pretend life is easier than it is. It means one stops organizing consciousness around lack alone. One stops feeding the habit of staring only at the broken piece, while forgetting the whole structure that still stands. There may be sorrows in your life. Certainly there are. There may be burdens, disappointments, and fears. But alongside them, there may also be enough goodness, enough support, enough access, enough functioning clarity to begin the work of the heart. To recognize that is not naivete. It is stewardship. Stewardship means protecting what is present. It means using one's conditions carefully, almost reverently, because they are not guaranteed. If the body is reasonably healthy, one uses that health for practice before illness comes. If the mind is lucid today, one turns toward truth before confusion thickens again. If there is enough food, enough shelter, enough stability that one need not spend every hour in survival mode, one should not squander all of that freedom in heedlessness. If one lives in relative peace, one should remember how many do not, and use that peace for inner cultivation, rather than for endless triviality. If noble teachings still exist nearby, one should listen while listening is possible, practice while instruction is available, and draw close to what is wholesome while such closeness can still be made. This is the gravity of rare opportunity, and perhaps the most humbling part of all is this: none of these favorable conditions have arisen solely because of me. We inherit them through countless visible and invisible causes. We are carried by family, society, culture, labor, generosity, sacrifice, and the preservation of teachings across generations. We are beneficiaries of efforts we did not make alone. Others protected peace, others copied texts, others memorized teachings, others practiced sincerely enough to keep the path alive, others built places of refuge, others fed communities, others endured hardship so that wisdom would not disappear from the world. To see this clearly softens pride. It also deepens reverence. A person who understands this no longer asks only, "What am I getting from life?" but also, "How shall I honor what has been handed to me?" To waste favorable conditions is not merely unfortunate. It is a kind of forgetting. It forgets the suffering of those without such access. It forgets the labor of those who preserved these blessings. It forgets the urgency of the human heart wandering in samsara. It forgets that this very meeting of youth or strength, health, sufficiency, peace, and true teaching may not happen again in such a complete way. And so this life, under favorable conditions, should be regarded with a kind of sober wonder, not sentimental wonder, as if we are admiring a pretty scene, but moral and spiritual wonder, wonder that awakens conscience, wonder that straightens the spine, wonder that says, "This should not be wasted. This should not be postponed endlessly. This should not be traded away for habits that leave the heart unchanged." If one can still understand the teaching, still feel remorse for harm, still delight in goodness, still make effort, still choose restraint, still recollect death, still cultivate compassion, still walk the path even one step at a time, then the opportunity is alive. And while it is alive, it asks for a response. Not a dramatic response necessarily, not a performance, not a declaration meant to impress anyone, Often the truest response is very quiet. To become a little more disciplined, a little more honest, a little less careless with speech, a little more faithful in meditation, a little more steady in generosity, a little more alert to the movements of craving, a little more respectful toward the teaching, the teacher, the community, and the preciousness of time. Great transformations are often built from these modest acts of remembering. The heart that truly feels rarity does not become anxious. It becomes careful. It becomes tender toward the conditions that support awakening. It stops treating the path as one option among many entertainments. It understands, with increasing depth, that to encounter these blessings together is difficult beyond measure. And because it is difficult, because it is uncertain, because it matters, one should protect it as one would protect a lamp in the wind. Then life begins to look different. The same body, the same home, the same schedule, the same imperfect circumstances may remain, but now they are seen as a field of practice rather than a list of defects. One no longer asks first, why is my life not better? One begins to ask, given what is here, how can I walk well? How can I turn this rare human birth, with these fleeting supports, into a cause for freedom? When that question appears sincerely, something important has already changed. The heart is no longer merely admiring the opportunity from a distance. It is ready to enter it. And once rarity is felt not just as an idea but as a living truth, a more intimate question naturally rises from within. What exactly should be done now? What should be done now may not be dramatic. It may not look impressive from the outside. It may not even resemble the image of spiritual life that the mind once imagined. But the next true step is often very simple: to stop overlooking the conditions for practice that are already present, and to begin using them with honesty. Many people wait for a perfect season before they commit themselves. They think they will practice seriously when the mind is calmer, when the body is stronger, when work becomes lighter, when family duties lessen, when finances feel secure, when society settles, when a better teacher appears, when the meditation hall is closer, when their faith becomes stronger, when their doubts disappear. In this way, the heart keeps postponing what it already knows to be precious. Days pass, years pass. The wish to practice remains, but it remains only as a wish. So this is the moment to look again, quietly and without self-deception. Among the 5 favorable times, which ones are touching your life right now, even imperfectly? Perhaps youth has already begun to fade, yet there is still enough energy to learn, to change habits, to restrain speech, to wake a little earlier, to sit a little longer, to turn away from old intoxications. Perhaps the body is not flawless, yet it is still capable of carrying you to a place of practice, of bowing, of breathing mindfully, of keeping attention steady for a few minutes at a time. Perhaps money is not abundant, yet there is enough food, enough shelter, enough stability that some hours can be protected for study and meditation. Perhaps the world is troubled, as it has always been in one way or another, but there remains enough safety to hear the Dhamma, enough order to gather, enough peace to live without constant terror. Perhaps the Sangha is not ideal in every place. Perhaps human weakness appears even in robes, yet the teachings are still being carried, recited, explained, preserved, and embodied by those who continue the lineage of practice. If even one of these supports is present, do not dismiss it. If 2 are present, do not waste them. If 3 or 4 are present, recognize how extraordinary that is. And if all 5, in some measure, have come together in your life, then understand with deep seriousness what a rare opening this is. The mind has a habit of speaking in extremes. It says, because my circumstances are not perfect, they are not good enough. It says, because I cannot practice as much as others, my effort hardly matters. It says, because I still have defilements, my practice is impure. But this is not wisdom. This is discouragement wearing the mask of intelligence. The path is not walked only by those who possess ideal conditions. It is walked by those who stop making excuses and begin where they stand. A small, sincere effort repeated steadily reshapes a life. A person who keeps one precept carefully today is not the same as the one who treated virtue lightly yesterday. A person who sits in meditation for 15 honest minutes each morning is not the same as the one who merely dreams of inner peace. A person who speaks a little less harshly, consumes a little less greedily, listens a little more deeply, reflects a little more often on impermanence, is already turning the wheel in the right direction. Liberation is lofty, yes, but the path toward it is woven from very human acts, done again and again with care. So perhaps the heart now needs not another admiration of the teaching, but a vow. Not a grand vow meant to flatter the ego, but a clear and livable commitment. Something clean, something real, something that can be carried into the next morning. For one person, that vow may begin with virtue. From this day, I will guard my speech more carefully. I will stop treating small falsehoods as harmless. I will be more mindful not to wound others through anger, sarcasm, or careless words. I will protect life. I will respect what is not mine. I will simplify desire rather than feed it. These are not small matters. To keep precepts sincerely is to build the ground on which meditation can stand without collapsing. It is to make the heart less divided against itself. For another, the vow may be about regular meditation. Each day, whether the mind feels bright or dull, I will sit. I will return to the breath. I will learn to remain. I will stop waiting for inspiration to do what discipline must do. In the beginning, meditation may seem uneventful, even uncomfortable, but much of its power lies precisely there. It trains the heart to stop fleeing itself. It teaches patience in a culture of restlessness. It reveals how thought seduces, how craving pulls, how aversion tightens, how the sense of self keeps reassembling itself around each passing experience. To sit down consistently is already an act of courage. For someone else, the right vow may be to study more deeply, not to collect teachings as ornaments, not to quote the Dhamma beautifully while living it faintly, but to really learn what the Buddha pointed to examine suffering, its cause, its ending, and the path leading to its ending, to listen carefully, to contemplate thoroughly, to let the words work on the heart until they stop being merely admired and start becoming known. Deep study, when joined with humility, protects practice from confusion. It helps the practitioner distinguish faith from fantasy, effort from strain, calm from dullness, renunciation from repression. For another, the next step may be service to the Sangha, to support those who preserve and transmit the teaching, to offer time, labor, resources, respect, or practical care, not because monks and nuns are symbols to be idealized from afar, but because the living continuity of the Dhamma depends on conditions, and those conditions do not sustain themselves. Temples need tending, gatherings need organizing, teachers need support, communities need hands and hearts willing to help quietly, without seeking recognition. To serve the Sangha well is to serve countless unseen beings who may one day hear the Dhamma because the lineage was protected. And for many, perhaps the necessary vow is to simplify life, not out of bitterness, not out of rejection of the world, but out of understanding. To see how much energy is lost in excess busyness, endless consumption, unnecessary comparison, digital noise, social performances, and desires that multiply faster than they satisfy. Simplicity is not poverty of spirit. It is the clearing of space. It is making room in one's days so that remembrance of the path does not have to fight for air. It is saying gently but firmly, not everything that calls me deserves my life. These commitments will differ from person to person. Capacity differs, duties differ, temperament differs, karma differs. The teaching does not ask everyone to force the same outer form. What matters is sincerity, steadiness, and right direction. The question is not, can I do everything at once? The question is, What wholesome effort can I truly sustain, beginning now? And it is important to be honest here. A vow should stretch the heart, but not break it. It should call forth diligence, but not become a theater of self-violence. Some people begin with great emotion and make promises far beyond their strength. For a few days they feel uplifted, then they fail, become ashamed, and abandon practice altogether. This too is a form of heedlessness. Better a modest commitment kept faithfully than a heroic declaration forgotten by next week. Better one precept guarded deeply than 10 spiritual ambitions worn lightly. Better one stable hour a week in service, one daily period of meditation honestly maintained, one habit of mindful restraint truly developed, than 100 noble intentions left floating in thought. Still, this caution should not become an excuse for timidity. There is a kind of false humility that says, I am too ordinary to practice seriously. But suffering does not ask whether one feels special. Aging, illness, separation, and death do not spare the modest or the doubtful. The need for the path is universal. Therefore, one should not shrink from effort as though the Dhamma belonged only to saints. The path becomes real precisely when ordinary people begin to live it in ordinary hours. And yes, not all conditions will ever be ideal. There may be family burdens, physical pain, unstable work, emotional wounds, social upheaval, disappointing communities, recurring doubt, and many unfinished matters in the heart. The Buddha's teaching does not require denial of these realities. It asks for something both more demanding and more liberating. Use what is available. If peace is limited, protect that limited peace. If time is scarce, sanctify the little time you have. If health is fragile, let fragility sharpen urgency rather than weaken resolve. If youth has passed, then let maturity bring seriousness. If society is troubled, let uncertainty deepen your refuge. If the Sangha is imperfect, then support what is worthy and remain faithful to the Dhamma with discernment. This is how sincerity grows, not by waiting for completeness, but by refusing to waste the incomplete good that has already been given. A lamp need not be the sun in order to dispel darkness. A clear stream need not be an ocean in order to quench thirst. In the same way, your present conditions need not be flawless in order to become the basis of practice. They need only be recognized, respected, and used. And when effort arises in this way, it ceases to be merely self-improvement. It becomes gratitude made visible. Gratitude to the Buddha, who discovered and revealed a path that cuts through delusion. Gratitude to the Dhamma, which continues to illuminate the lawfulness of suffering and the possibility of release. Gratitude to the Sangha, those noble disciples and all sincere practitioners who have preserved, practiced, explained, and embodied the teaching across generations. It is easy to say, I am grateful. The lips can do that quickly, but the deepest gratitude is not expressed only in phrases, offerings, ceremonies, or emotional reverence. It is expressed in what one does with one's life. If one truly honors the Buddha, one trains. If one truly honors the Dhamma, one studies, reflects, and practices. If one truly honors the Sangha, one supports, protects, and learns from the conditions that keep the teaching alive in the world. To bow is beautiful, to chant is beautiful, to offer flowers, incense, robes, food, or service is beautiful. But the most intimate offering is this: to take the favorable conditions one has received and not squander them. To let youth, health, sufficiency, peace, and the presence of the Sangha become causes for awakening rather than decorations around forgetfulness. To say, through daily effort, because this path has reached me, I will not leave it untouched. There is tenderness in that. There is dignity in that. A human life, so uncertain and so brief, begins to gather around what is essential. Instead of being pulled apart by every impulse, it slowly aligns itself. Instead of scattering energy in 10,000 directions, it returns to a center. And from that center, even simple acts become luminous. Rising early to sit while the world is still quiet, pausing before speaking, remembering impermanence in a moment of irritation, giving support where support is needed, choosing restraint when indulgence is easy, opening a sutta not out of obligation but out of love for truth. This is how reflection ripens into commitment, not through force, but through clarity, not through spiritual vanity, but through remembrance. One sees that the favorable times are not abstract teachings belonging to another age. They are mirrors held up to one's own life. They ask, gently but unmistakably, what has been given to you, and what will you do with it? Let that question settle honestly. Do not rush past it. Do not answer too quickly with words that sound noble. Listen until the answer becomes quiet enough to be true. Then choose one thing, or a few things, and bind them to your days. Let your commitment have a shape. Let it enter your schedule, your speech, your spending, your relationships, your habits of attention. Let it become visible in how you live when no one is watching. Because in the end, the path is not strengthened by beautiful thoughts alone. It is strengthened by repeated turning back to mindfulness, turning back to restraint, turning back to wisdom, turning back to compassion, turning back to the aspiration for freedom. Again and in favorable times and unfavorable ones alike, this turning is the work. And when such resolve has truly begun, there is a natural stillness that follows. The mind no longer circles endlessly around what should happen someday. It begins to participate in the path here now, with the conditions at hand. At the end of such reflection, only one final movement remains: to gather the teaching into the heart and let it settle there. And so the teaching comes to rest in a place that is both simple and profound. We have not been asked to wait for a perfect life, a perfect mind, or a perfect world before we begin. We have been asked to recognize the preciousness of certain conditions when they are present, and to understand them for what they are: brief openings, rare alignments, merciful chances. The Buddha did not point them out to make us anxious. He pointed them out to make us awake. When we gather all five together, they appear like 5 doors opening at once. In the house of human life, youth is one door, health is another, material sufficiency is another, peace in the land is another, and the presence of a harmonious, pure Sangha is the 5th. Each one is a blessing. Each one makes practice more possible, more steady, more accessible, and yet each one is uncertain. Each one can close without notice. This is why they must not be admired from a distance. They must be used. Youth is a season many people think will last longer than it does. In youth, there is energy, courage, endurance, and a certain elasticity of body and mind. One can rise early, stay attentive longer, recover more quickly, commit with force, and reshape habits before they harden into chains. The fires of greed, aversion, and delusion can be met with vigor. The work of restraint can be carried out with strength. The effort to learn, reflect, meditate, serve, and transform can be undertaken with freshness. Yet youth moves quietly. It does not always announce its departure. One day the body still obeys, and then slowly it begins to negotiate. So if youth is here, even in part, it is not merely a time to dream about the path. It is a time to walk it with sincerity, before age arrives with its own weight, its own limitations, its own undeniable teachings. Then there is health, or at least a body not overwhelmed by illness. This too is easy to overlook until it changes. When the body is relatively well, the mind has room. There is a certain ease in sitting, standing, walking, bowing, listening, studying, working carefully with the heart. When pain is not constantly calling attention to itself, energy can be directed toward contemplation and discipline. This does not mean the sick cannot practice. Many do, with tremendous beauty and depth. But it is simply true that when the body is less burdened, the path can often be cultivated with fewer obstacles. When illness grows strong, it can shake concentration, patience, mood, and strength. That is why a healthy day is not an ordinary day. It is a usable day. It is a day in which effort can be planted more deeply. To awaken to this is not to become fearful of sickness. It is to become wise about wellness. The third favorable time is the time of sufficiency, when food, shelter, and the basic needs of life are not consuming every hour. There is a quiet dignity in naming this condition honestly. A mind tormented by survival does not move as freely toward contemplation. When life is no longer entirely swallowed by the struggle to secure the next meal, to pay the next debt, to endure constant economic pressure, there is space for the Dhamma to be remembered and lived. One can read, sit in silence, keep precepts carefully, support others, listen to teachings, and shape a life with intention. Sufficiency does not mean luxury. It does not mean endless comfort or abundance. It means enough. Enough stability to breathe, enough support to choose practice over panic, enough ground beneath the feet to remember what truly matters. If such a condition exists, even modestly, it should not be spent only on distraction. It is a rare gift, and gifts reveal their value by how they are used. The fourth favorable time widens the lens from the personal to the collective. There are times when a land is torn by war, social collapse, violence, famine, flood, fire, disaster, and fear. In such times, the heart of practice may remain, but the outer conditions become harsh and unstable. Safety disappears. Communities fracture. Attention is scattered by danger. Survival takes precedence. Therefore, when a country is at peace, when travel is possible, when homes stand, when people can gather, when seasons are kind enough, when fear is not pressing at the door every day, this too is not small. It is a precious field of conditions. Practice ripens more easily where there is social stability, where there is enough order for study, meditation, community, and service to continue. Peace in the land is not something to take for granted. It is one of the unseen supports of the path. Many do not notice it until it is gone, but the wise notice it while it remains, and they let it deepen their gratitude and strengthen their effort. And then there is the fifth time, perhaps the most sacred in its implications, the time when the Sangha is harmonious, pure, and living in a way that preserves the Buddha's teaching in the world. This is a blessing beyond measure. The Dhamma does not continue through books alone. It is carried in lives. It is embodied in restraint, in humility, in patience, in discipline, in study, in meditation, in ethical conduct, in wise guidance, in communities that do not merely speak of liberation, but orient themselves toward it. The presence of a true Sangha gives form to the path. It protects the teaching from distortion. It offers refuge to those who are lost, encouragement to those who are weary, and example to those who are still learning what practice looks like when it becomes real. To bow inwardly toward the Sangha is to recognize a debt of gratitude that cannot be measured. Generation after generation, there have been those who received the teaching, practiced it, preserved it, recited it, clarified it, lived it, and passed it on. Not for status, not for gain, not for praise, but so that beings yet unborn, beings wandering in confusion, might still encounter the path to freedom. There is a quiet grandeur in this. The Buddha's compassion pointed out the way, but the Sangha carries that light across time. Through changing cultures, changing languages, changing ages of decline and renewal, the lamp has not gone out because there have been those willing to guard it. In this, the old reverence remains ever fresh, homage to the Sangha, the noble teachers, the great guides, who continue the sublime way of the Blessed One, who teach according to conditions without selfish grasping, who stand as examples and lead beings onward. When the community of practitioners is united, respectful of the training, and sincere in the work of purification, the world is less dark than it would otherwise be. Even those who have never met such practitioners directly still benefit from their existence. The path remains visible because someone has walked it carefully enough to leave footprints. If we look again at these 5 favorable times, we can see that they are not merely circumstances to appreciate. They are calls to responsibility. Youth calls, use your strength before it fades. Health calls, use your vitality before the body changes. Sufficiency calls, use your stability before conditions tighten. Peace calls, use your safety before turbulence arrives. The harmonious Sangha calls, use the living presence of the teaching while it is still near, still audible, still embodied, still available. There is tenderness in this teaching, but also firmness. The tenderness lies in how compassionate it is to be reminded. We are forgetful, we drift, we assume there will be more time. We postpone what matters because the day seems ordinary, and tomorrow seems guaranteed. But tomorrow has never signed such a promise. The firmness lies in the truth that no one can practice yesterday. The missed day is gone. The unguarded season has already passed. And no one can borrow tomorrow. No storehouse contains future effort waiting to be withdrawn in advance. There is only this day, this body, this breath, this meeting with conditions as they are. So, today must become the field of effort. Not tomorrow imagined, not yesterday regretted. Today, with whatever measure of youth remains. Today, with whatever measure of health remains. Today, with whatever measure of sufficiency is present. Today, under whatever measure of peace shelters this life. Today, while the teachings can still be heard, while the example of practitioners can still be found, while conscience is still stirred by truth, this is enough, more than enough. The path has always begun exactly here. To strive, then, does not mean to become harsh or frantic. It does not mean to panic before impermanence. It means to become honest. It means to stop living as though favorable conditions are permanent furniture in the house of life. They are guests, honored guests, helpful guests, precious guests. Welcome them, but do not mistake them for possessions. Their very instability is what gives them urgency. Their very fragility is what gives them value. Because they pass, they must be used well. Because they are uncertain, they must be met with mindfulness. Because they do not last, they can become powerful causes for awakening. Perhaps this is one of the most beautiful qualities of the Buddha's teaching. It does not waste reality. Aging becomes a reason to practice. Health becomes a reason to practice. Lack becomes a reason to practice. Sufficiency becomes a reason to practice. Turbulence becomes a reason to deepen refuge. Peace becomes a reason not to be complacent. The presence of the Sangha becomes a reason for reverence and learning. The absence of certainty becomes a reason to wake up. Nothing is dismissed. Everything, when seen rightly, points back toward the ending of suffering. And if the heart is quiet enough, it begins to understand that urgency and peace do not have to oppose each other. One can feel the briefness of life without despair. One can know conditions are unstable without becoming afraid. One can be earnest without becoming rigid. One can practice steadily, warmly, faithfully, simply because one has seen clearly. This chance is precious. That understanding alone changes the texture of a day. It changes how one speaks, what one postpones, how one spends time, what one feeds in the mind, what one protects, what one releases. Then gratitude becomes more than a feeling. It becomes conduct. To be grateful for youth is to not waste it entirely on heedlessness. To be grateful for health is to let the body serve the path while it can. To be grateful for sufficiency is to use one's time and means wisely. To be grateful for peace to deepen practice instead of dissolving into distraction. To be grateful for the Sangha is to listen well, support what is wholesome, and take the teaching seriously enough to live it. This is how gratitude ripens into action. This is how reverence becomes real. And beyond all of this stands the immeasurable compassion of the Buddha, who knew the habits of the human mind so well that he taught not only the highest truth, but also the practical wisdom of timing. He knew how easily beings delay the good. He knew how often people reach for awakening after the supporting conditions have weakened. So he pointed out these favorable times not to burden us, but to spare us from regret. In that compassion there is both gentleness and great clarity. He did not merely say that liberation is possible. He also taught us when to exert ourselves most carefully, so that the possibility would not remain abstract. So let the teachings settle in the most intimate way. If these conditions are present, cherish them. If some have already faded, use what remains. If only one or two are still available, begin there. The path does not demand perfection before the first step. It asks only sincerity, discernment, and the willingness to practice with the opportunity that is here. There is no need for dramatic vows, no need for display, just this quiet turning of the heart toward what is true, and this steady decision not to squander what supports the path. While the lamp is still lit, read by it. While the road is still open, walk it. While wise voices can still be heard, listen. While the mind can still be trained, train it. While goodness can still be strengthened, strengthen it. While causes for awakening remain within reach, do not sleep through them. And when the final silence comes after these reflections, let it not feel empty. Let it feel like an invitation, a gentle, solemn, compassionate invitation. The favorable conditions of life do not endure forever. They move, they thin, they disappear. To understand this is not sorrow alone, it is also grace, because once we truly see it, we know what must be done. We practice while the opportunity is still here. We honor the Buddha not only with praise, but with effort. We honor the Sangha not only with reverence, but with sincerity. We honor this brief human life by using its passing conditions for purification, for wisdom, and for freedom. And so, with calm and respect, let this final reminder remain in the heart. Favorable conditions do not last forever, and true gratitude for the Buddha's teaching is shown by practicing while the opportunity is still here.